So I'm going to call this City Council special study session with the YMCA to order. Mr. City Manager, I'm going to have you kick us off here.
Okay.
Okay, while he's over there whispering in ears, maybe we will start by just a round of introductions really quick. Dave, I'm going to put you on the spot to start us off. Just quick introductions so we know everyone's role here.
Sounds good. Dave Mayer, Executive Director of the Sammamish Community Water.
Tom Hornish, Council Member.
Marcia Eisenberger, Strategic Advisor for the YMCA.
Chris Ross, Council.
Tom Lamb, CFO for the Y.
I'm Christy Malchow, Mayor of Sammamish.
Lori Yaden, President and CEO of the YMCA.
Jason Ritchie, Councilmember.
Rick Rudemetkin, City Manager, Sammamish.
Alonda Williams, Chief Experience Officer, YMCA.
Pam Stewart, Sammamish City Council.
Lonnie Rosenwald, outside counsel for the YMCA.
Great. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. A quick housekeeping. The lights have to be green for the mic to be on. So if your mic is red, the tapes will not pick you up. So please press the button to speak. And then if you have a comment or anything along the way, we all have tent cards. If you could put your tent cards up, and then I'll know to recognize you to speak. Okay, Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor, Council, YMCA guests. Thank you guys for coming. Really appreciate it. To open this meeting, we have we sent some information to the YMCA as well as our council. Some questions, some comments, and things like that. Councilor Hornish has put together a few more things for this meeting. So to get started, I'd like to turn this over to Councilor Hornish, kind of get us rolling, kind of why we're here, kind of a thing. And then obviously if you have questions or other councilors would like to make comments, then we can just go from there, Mayor. So with that, if it'd be okay, I'd like to turn
All right, thanks.
Very good.
And thanks to the Y folks that have showed up. We appreciate you coming to try to get some questions answered. We've been through this a little bit. We have our team over here that has had discussions, I know. But this is for everybody to kind of ask questions and get up to speed and kind of know what's going on. So, Melanie, can you pull up that PowerPoint, please? Very good. If I'd known that, I'd made animation. How do I work it? I did. The play? All right, so I put this together. I was traveling this weekend, so I was working in bits and fits and starts. So hopefully it's cogent. Can you go to the display or presentation? There you go. Right, whoops, you had it. See, that screen usually works, but there you go. We can work with that if we had to. Karen, you can introduce yourself.
Oh, yes, we did intros. You just want to introduce yourself real quick?
Sorry, I was like, Karen Moran. So I missed everybody. Gosh, okay. So Karen Moran, City Council.
Oh, yeah, Karen and I can.
So if that's all you got, Melanie, we can work with it. I never quite figure out why our technology is so hard here. Well, while she's pulling that up, I can start the outline anyhow so we can kind of not have a dead spot. What I was hoping to tonight is set out a scope for this discussion And I would hope that the scope can be tonight on the agreement and how the accounting and reporting is done under the Section 14 annual report. That we have 2 reports from the YMCA in that regard, and we can talk about those specifically, but I would hope that that's the scope. Anything about the history of the agreement, how it came about, discussions from 6+ years ago, things that we're talking about, other operations, the hours and those type of things. I think we can save those for another day, hopefully, or maybe we can at least save them until later. But if we can focus on the accounting and annual report, I think we can probably get through this in the limited time that we have and not stay here till midnight, hopefully. So do I have control now, or?
You can run it like this, Counselor.
Yeah, let's just do it like this, if we could.
If you run it from beginning, it might turn off. You could try it again.
Can I go back, or?
No, the top left was just from beginning,
Well,
right there. And then push slideshow.
well, can you, well, wait a minute, hang on. Okay, I covered the first slide already. Second slide, highlights. What I'd like to do, if I could, I got about 5 slides. Actually, it's 9 slides, I'm sorry. So we're all level set and understand what the agreement says. I've tried to paraphrase and summarize. And as we go through these sections in the brackets, you'll see that I have, this is where it's in the agreement. So if anybody here has questions about a specific term and summary that I have, we can pull up the actual agreement and look at that to see if what I've stated is not quite correct or a clarification or whatever, if we could. So it became effective on April 29th, 2013. This was before there was any groundbreaking whatsoever. So this was an agreement that was a long time ago, 6+ years. The term for the lease is 25 years after the occupancy, which was, and then there's a 25-year option at the Y. Whoa. The rent is, the Y pays $1 a year and to maintain and operate the center, and the city pays $1 for the recreation land that I think we're all familiar with too. That was kind of a trade-off. May I use the term quid pro quo? Can I go back now? Wait a minute. All right. Construction costs, roughly $25 million. How come it's changing? There. Roughly 20. Am I doing that? Yes. Okay. Roughly $25 million contributed by the city. The Y was to raise $5 million and pay at the occupancy, and it's amortized over 40 years. The Y is to pay for and supply and will own all the fixtures, furniture, and equipment. For example, the weights and the cardio platforms and those type of things. Estimated to be about $500,000. And the Y to supply the initial startup capital, estimated to be $300,000. I got a first question. Has the Y ever recovered that 300, or did you put 300 in? Did you take it back? I mean, I hope you did. You should.
We have not taken it back in the way that it's outlined here. We put $300,000. That's upfront cost for like staff and
right.
And that
You got to have some capital to get it rolling. Correct. But yeah. So we can talk about that more later on. But I think it probably should be. That wasn't part of the contribution. It was just initial startup capital, if you will. Maintenance and repair costs. Here's where we get into some of the nitty gritty. I think the routine maintenance. The Y is responsible to maintain and develop to develop the annual maintenance plans for the major systems, subject to review by the city. This is in Section 8A. We get into that in more detail a little bit later. Custodial, 8B. There's different language in 8B that says Y is to provide the custodial at its own expense. That's the only place in this agreement that at its own expense states. Everything else says the Y will be responsible. So it begs the question, is that something different that the Y was supposed to be paying that outside of the operations of the Y? We can talk about that. Maintenance and repair continued. 8C, landscape, Y responsible for planters, costs, city to maintain adjacent property and parking structure, landscape, irrigation, replace dead plants. Parking structure, parking lot, that's on the city, including sweeping and snow removal. The Y is supposed to keep the sidewalks clear. Now, 8E, I think, is an issue that we'll probably have to talk about, and you see a couple questions I have there. But Y is responsible for the major capital elements. And we might want to look at that term if we get into this detail, but the major capital being roof, HVAC, major equipment in the building. The Ys developed a plan subject to the city's review and approval, 8E2, and you get the permits for when you want to do the work. The Y, this is the fourth bullet there I don't really understand, and maybe somebody in the Y can help me if they're understanding. But it says the capital expenses for major capital elements to be amortized over 40 years. But that runs contrary to that if it's coming out of the bucket one that came from the operations. I could understand that if the Y was supposed to be on the hook to fund it. Let me back up a second. Anytime you have an agreement, and I'll call it a partnership or a joint venture, you have two parties, and they're running their own businesses. And then you have a new business that you come together with, our center over here, where the Y has their business and they're operating the Y, and the city has our business and we're working with the Y and helping the Y go. It's not clear from this clause in my book anyhow, why we would amortize anything that came out of the operations for the capital replacement maintenance. Because later on, we'll talk about termination, that in the termination, any money that's not been amortized by the Y gets repaid. But this wasn't the Y's money if it's coming from bucket one. This seems to make it sound almost like the capital maintenance was supposed to be funded by Y on its own, not from the operations of the center. I'm not sure that was the intent,
That was
and
not
yeah.
the intent at all. Yeah, not at all.
So we'll have to kind of, and maybe what we need to do is get rid of this amortization of the 40 years of the capital maintenance. That doesn't make sense if it's coming from the operations. Just to throw that out, but to be discussed later on. Continuing with maintenance repair, there is a facilities committee. I don't know what the status of that. Rick, do you know, or does anybody know that the facilities committee, Dave, do you know?
Yes, that committee meets on a monthly basis.
Okay.
It is a mix of community members, city staff, and community members.
And I think it's supposed to be meeting to recommend the maintenance to be done. Is that correct?
That is a part of the agenda of the meeting, yeah.
The other is the operations, but
We also talk about, oftentimes because of the communication flow, like there might be a city council member that received an email from a citizen about a particular program, and so we're able to consolidate all those on a monthly basis to be able to make sure that when we're answering that question, that we're answering it with consistency.
Okay.
So that it's an hour and a half meeting every month that takes place at the Y, and Sevda Baran is the staff representative from the city that participates in that meeting.
okay. So for the scope of tonight, as to the maintenance and costs, they are the ones that recommend what needs to be done to maintain the center. Is that correct?
I would also say too, in addition to that monthly committee meeting, we also have a monthly facilities walkthrough.
With that committee?
With Sevda Baran and our facilities director, and the Sevda keeps notes that she files on a monthly basis of our walk around, talking about responsibility of specific items. So let's say that there's as we're doing our walk through the building, let's say that there's a tile that's on the floor that needs to be replaced. She'll mark that in the notes. We'll repair the tile during the time that is in between that meeting if we hadn't seen it before. And then when we go through the next month, we'll take those notes out and to be able to make sure that the tile is repaired. And so there's a monthly facility walkthrough. We cover every square inch of the building.
But not with the facilities committee. Is that correct?
We do it with the city staff and with our facilities
So it's not
director.
with the facilities committee. Okay, I just wanted to understand. Do we have minutes of the facilities committee?
Sevda keeps the notes of those
You might want
meetings.
to get those at some point, Rick, for us.
She also receives a monthly report from our facilities director. We have a online facilities software that tracks maintenance, repairs, and things like that. So we're able to pull that out of our system, and he sends that to Sevda on a monthly basis as well, and she also tracks that file.
So it's those two that are figuring out what needs to be repaired. Sounds like. All right. We'll keep moving. Utilities, wise to pay that, except for the city pays the irrigation and the water for the landscaping. Security system, why to maintain. Surplus funds, bucket 1, 2, and 3. It was interesting, I think, if you look at the actual agreement, it says no surplus funds are expected after the reserves for maintenance, replacement, and capital expense. This is after you get to the operating surplus, revenue minus expenses. Then you get into the bucket 1, bucket 2, bucket 3. Bucket 2 is a 2-month OpEx, operations expense, and bucket 3 is the remainder that would go, maybe used to go back into the center. I'm going to pause there for a second to see if anybody has any questions other than where the fund one, or bucket 1 for the CapEx was meant to come from. We've talked about. Any questions, comments, concerns so far? We're all in agreement that this is kind of.
What do you mean by that comment you just made about where the money from bucket 1 comes from?
Can you go? I guess I have control. Sorry. The bottom 2 bullets there. The wise capital expense for major capital elements to be amortized over 40 years. If the operations have enough surplus to pay for the CapEx maintenance, it doesn't make sense in my mind that has any amortization as to the wise issue or ownership of those funds.
So, okay, so if I understand, it's not that we're questioning where the money comes from to put in bucket 1, we're just questioning whether there should be any amortization.
I think I'm okay with just doing away with the amortization because I think the intent probably was to have it pay for itself. But I think the agreement calls into question whether or not it was meant to be that. But I think these are the clarifications and points that we're trying to get through and understand here.
So just to make sure I understand, so the idea is, like we talked about, right, is that you guys receive income, you pay for your normal monthly maintenance and operations. Anything left over from that goes into bucket 1 until it hits a certain number, which is one of the things we'll discuss later, I'm sure. Once that bucket is full, any extra we have to go into bucket 2, right, which is for the 2 months of maintenance and operations. And then if, as the agreement says, in the unlikely event there are extra funds, they would go into bucket 3, where we could jointly decide how to reinvest those in the facility. Is that?
With one point of clarification, bucket 1 does not have any cap.
Does not have any cap.
It can be
Yeah, but
$25 million.
it's an agreed upon number.
No.
Based on the,
No.
no. All right.
It
So
is not-
then,
it is
so
not.
then there'd never be a bucket 2 or bucket 3.
No.
No.
Bucket 1 is that amount that we all agree should be set aside for the expected CapEx
Well,
maintenance.
Isn't that what I just said, an agreed upon number? Isn't that the same?
Well, if you, let me try it. If year-to-date, the reserving for capital maintenance is 3 million through year 2, as soon as we reach 3 million for year 2, then you start funding bucket 2 as I see the
I get
agreement.
that. I just, in layman's terms, bucket 1 is some number that we all agree to, and when that fills up, then you go to bucket 2, right?
I
Just
don't
on the
think we
simplest-
agreed to a number yet.
I
think
didn't
that's
say we
another
did. I
issue.
said a number that we will agree, anyway. never mind.
It's an annual reserve number. There is no cap. After 10 years, if we've been reserving X dollars, it's 10X, but that could be 20X if we agree to it.
Councilmember Ritchie? Yes, that's what I said. Okay. Councilmember Ritchie?
I would like to ask that this turn into a little bit more of a conversation rather than just a presentation. I think that the questions that are being asked are meaningful and they deserve a YMCA leadership response. We invite people here for their perspective, and I mean, we've heard 3 council members, 4 now, speak on this, and I think that's important we hear from them, at least, if not way more so than we have up to this point. And I appreciate you guys coming here tonight, being here and driving all the way out here and participating in this and helping us better understand these accounting procedures. So I just want to be quiet and hear what y'all have to say about this. So thank you.
Well, and I would like to continue on so that we have a level set understanding of both parties before we get into that discussion. I think that is why we're here. I totally agree. But unless we all agree, and I think part of this is for council members that haven't been involved and haven't been into this to better understand what the agreement is too. I want to make sure we're all on the same page. I've been in these type of discussions, and if you're talking apples and oranges, it just doesn't work.
I think we're definitely talking apples and oranges here, and I think that's important that we level
Well,
set
I asked
that.
the question a second ago. Is there
I think
anybody
so-
that has any questions?
So, Mayor, are we doing a conversation
so
or what's going on as far as the
We're not
10-minute
having a
rule and all that? Or?
conversation. You have the floor right now
Yeah.
until you're done speaking.
Okay. So what I would ask is that we turn this more into a conversation so that we have a better understanding. There's some questions being asked that are some level setting, and it seems like the council's setting the level without any input from the Y. And this is a partnership, and I would hope that we can try to better understand each side's perspective to set levels together rather than here's the council, here's the level, deal with it. And I don't think that's an appropriate way to build a good rapport with people.
So, Councilmember Ritchie, I appreciate your comments. I think what Councilmember Hornish is attempting to do is just give us the very basic background, and it sounds like we're going to double back
Yes.
on this in a minute. He's just trying to give those of us who have not been serving on that committee, if you will, in concert with the YMCA, so that we are all, the level set is of understanding of the agreement in general and some history. And then I think we're going to go back and dive in. Is that correct, Councilmember Hornish? Is that
Yes.
okay?
I'm raising a couple of questions that we'll come back to be fair.
Okay, Deputy Mayor Moran.
Well, Dave, by the way, congratulations. I haven't seen you since then, so. But has anybody from the Y have any questions or anything anything that's been said? Has there been anything that's been said that's been in question or not agreed with? Because if there is, please say so. Okay.
That's the thing is, we want to make sure that it's not just
Yeah.
Tom's level that's being set, but the Y's too.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's use our tent cards.
So
Marcia?
I just want to make sure that, yes, if there's something that he's doing during the presentation that you're going, well, not exactly, then please chime right in.
Yes, stick your tent cards up if there's something along the way that deserves more attention.
Absolutely. Thank you,
So, Marcia?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of questions, I think also with the 40-year amortization, that I think that is a big question that we have to sort out and have some dialogue and conversation about. I think that it's important to realize that this is an operations agreement. It is not a joint venture. And so I think that changes a little bit of the conversation as well, as the way the intent of it is an operations agreement. And so it's not set to be a joint venture. And I guess I would really also, and thank you for your comments. I think that to be in a true kind of spirit of partnership and conversation, we certainly have some thoughts, and we've spent a great deal of time as an organization really looking at this operations agreement and listening to and thinking about the questions that were given to us. And we want to be respectful in the way that we communicate that to everyone. And I know that Loria, our CEO, has some comments, some framing comments as well. But I think that the truth is we do have to have some healthy dialogue on what the answers are going to be to some of these questions. And we're willing to be here and to have that dialogue. So how we get to that, I guess, is I think the next question.
Councilmember Hornish.
Okay, so just to kind of continue on and finish out the agreement then, insurance, each party has general liability, different amounts, as you can see there, 1 to 2 for the city, 5 to 10 for the Y. Y's primary, secondary is the city's. The Y has property damage for its own equipment, the fixture, furniture, and equipment, FF&E, that they own, the auto and workers' comp, and the city has property damage for the building and the parking lot, plus the auto and workers' comp.
Okay,
Now-
I'm gonna pause you for just a second. We have a comment over here. Loria?
I just wanted to say good evening. I'm only 8 months into the Y. And I joined the Y because I have a heart of service and a heart for the community, like the other folk that you've been working with, going back, I guess, even before 2013. Marcia and others who are around the table who've been around. And when the team came to me to say that you had some questions, some things that we needed to talk about, and asked if I would come, I couldn't think of a better place to be this evening than here, because this relationship is important. Why? It's because this group, maybe different people at the time, set out to do something pretty spectacular for this community a long time ago. And we've been wildly successful at accomplishing that, based on what I understand. Again, I'm 8 months in, but everybody I talk to talk about the success of what we together have done in this community. And so I think we should just pause and take a breath and be pretty proud of that. Now, to go forward and have even more success, it's important for us to take the frame of where we started and to take the success that we're experiencing even today and ask ourselves, how do we continue to build on that success together for the benefit of the community? It's about the community. We're with you in serving this community. So when we stepped into this, we really didn't know at the time whether, the ground is going to shift one day and all of a sudden we're going to have to replace your building. But we took that on as part of the risk, okay? We didn't really know exactly what to expect, but as your operator, we took on those risks. So I just want us to make sure that as we talk about, now that we see that we've been wildly successful in some ways, we have to realize that there's risks that the Y has taken on at the same time in the name of serving the community. So let's not forget that frame as we try to think about the entirety of the agreement and the entirety of what we're trying to accomplish together. I just ask that we keep that frame in front of us. We're going through highlighted terms, and I'll give you a disclaimer. I am an attorney. My training is to look at this and say, I cannot process things out of context and snippets, because what matters are the words around it. What matters is the context. What did we set out to do? What are the preamble? So we can talk about the little things and the pieces here that are on the screen, but what do we want to accomplish together for this community? I would say if we can get that squarely in front of us and ask ourselves, how do we accomplish that together? Maybe that's a better frame to start with than, some of these phrases that are on the screen. I'm willing to go at it however you want to. But at the end of it, my hope is that we can come away with something that is even more successful for the community than even what we imagined from the very beginning and from what we've already accomplished. And with that, I'll turn my tent cart back on its side.
We're going to have to institute that in our SLT meetings.
Yes, I like it.
I want to go and address a couple of your points. We all agree, and by the way, I'm an attorney as well, so welcome. We all know as an attorney, peril evidence doesn't apply to the four corners of an agreement. So what we're talking about now is what you said we all agree with in context. That was the whole plan. What we're here to talk about tonight is what does the agreement say of how things should be done, or what does the agreement not say about how things should be done? Because I think a lot of things are not addressed in the agreement, to be fair, as to how the accounting's supposed to be done, what's supposed to be taken into account for expense, what isn't, those type of things. So we'll come back to that. The ground shift, I'm glad you used that example. That's our risk. Property damage for building, that's our risk. That's not the Y's risk, just to clarify. That's not a risk that the Y took. So let me finish out real quick then. Melanie, I'm not able to make this thing go to the next slide. Can you do that?
Can we go back to that? I'm sorry. Property damage?
Of
Is
the-
that property damage for the building itself?
Yes. Property damage for, whoops.
I got it.
She's working against.
Property damage for personal property in the FFFE that the Y owns, that is your insured, that's your liability. If something happens and the earthquake tips over a.
Oh, you said earthquake.
Yeah.
I didn't say earthquake.
You said the ground shifts.
And so it doesn't have to shift because of an earthquake,
The pool. Okay, that's a fair. Okay.
right?
Yeah, that's fair.
Okay,
Okay.
all right.
It would be a question whether or not property damage would cover that or not, to be fair. So. Okay, can we go to the next slide then, Melanie? Taxes, pretty straightforward there, if you will. The termination, and this gets back into that 40-year amortization, the city or Y can terminate without cause after 10 years of the agreement. So coming up on April 29th, 2023 is the earliest either party could terminate. 18-month notice, that's 2 years from now, basically, 2 years from tomorrow. Terminate without cause, the city would be required, if the city terminates without cause, the city is required to buy out the Y's $5 million capital contribution that's amortized over 40 years, and the capital investment costs, which are the CapEx maintenance funded by the Y, both on the 40 years, like I talked about. Now, that capital investment cost is the issue I think we're going to come back to in a little bit. The rec property lease is coterminous and cross-termination, cross-default, if you will. If there's a termination for default, either city can do that only after the Section 33 dispute resolution. And if the city terminates for default, then there is no buyout of the Y's capital commitment or the capital investment costs. At the termination, the Y removes the FF&E as long as the fixtures don't hurt the property.
Okay, hang tight. Gloria, did you have another comment?
What is FFE?
I'm sorry, fixtures, furniture, and equipment.
Thank you.
Yeah, I guess I'm just trying to reframe of the scope of the conversation. Are we going to go through every term of the agreement? Are we going to talk about the terms that affect the questions that were raised?
We're just trying to make sure everybody understands what the agreement says so that we can talk about what the agreement was meaning to say.
Okay.
I think there's only about one or two more slides. Next slide, Melanie. Dispute resolution, I think we're certainly in the informal discussions. If there is no resolution, then 15 days notice to the other party, 15 days to fix it. If it's fixed, no issue. If the complaining party is not satisfied after that first 30 days, then they call a meeting. Could consider this a meeting. If still not satisfied after another 30 days, then request non-binding mediation. And before any litigation, you got to go through those steps. Next slide.
I have a question.
Yep.
Yep, question.
You want to go back?
No. It kind of goes to Lori's point. I would, if the points that we're really here to talk about are how we account for reserves, then let's have that conversation. Educating people on the content of the operating agreement. I feel like people can read the agreement if they had questions or concerns, but as we've met over the last couple years to try to dig into the answers to these questions, we continually come back to the two big issues. And so from a perspective of partnership, that I feel like that let's talk about what is the concern. And if there are other concerns, we'll certainly bring it up, but these are not of, these points are not of issue as far as I'm aware. We've had no discussion about these being concerns.
Okay, so the history of what we've had from the financial reports, annual reports, section 14, is the first report we got was a year and a half ago in early 18, which was for the stub period of 16 and 17. We got no report for 16, but that was probably fine. That first report had an accounting methodology of using a reserve for the depreciation and amortization, which is a non-cash charge, of the 40-year amortization of the building cost, right? You agree? Okay. As the CapEx maintenance reserve. That raised a lot of questions. So to your point, I think we have been discussing this for 18 months, over 18 months. So these are issues that we haven't resolved after 18 months, which is why we're here tonight. And we did away with committees at council, just to be fair. So we have the full council here to better understand, which is why I'm trying to give the background that we just went through. But that was the first history we got that raised a lot of questions from some of us in business to understand what the agreement says and what was being done. In the interim, correct me if I'm wrong, the Y went out and got an EMG study that estimated the capital maintenance that they expect over the next 20 years, I think it is, right? And that agreement that study was dated January 8th, 2019, the beginning of this year. In our earlier conversations with Chris and me as the subcommittee, so to speak, there was a second report that was then given to us and given to staff, but not given to council because we still had a lot of questions that we were trying to understand and work out. We never worked them out, to be fair, right? They were still unresolved, so that's why the Y then gave the report to staff. We got it, and then we kind of got busy doing other things, and now we're back on it, basically. In that second report, the Y then added back the depreciation and amortization that they initially had taken off in the first report, and then took the future value, 25 years future value dollars of today's full replacement value from the EMG report and straight line such expense back over the 25 years. Is that correct?
I just want to say, to be fair, that there was never a requirement for us. Thanks, Rick. To be fair, there never was a requirement for us to do any kind of report as it relates to a capital expense. We did that on our own volition to try to bring a little bit more clarity to the city on how we were looking at this, what was to be done. Nowhere in the operations agreement did it say we had to do an outside estimate of capital expense. It says we had to put together a plan, but it didn't say that we needed to provide any extra reports to the city in any way about this information.
I'd like to respond to that if I could.
Can I get to Dave? Dave?
Just a real quick note, only because I've seen this come up pretty consistently with the timing of the report. I just want to make note that the report was given at a timeline that was actually deemed by both council and staff at the time, and it was pushed back because of other pending issues that the council was dealing with at the time. So it seems to come up often that it seemed like a delay, and that was not the case.
Don't think there's an issue there.
Okay. Gloria?
I just want us to, because I've heard this has come up and it's coming back, I just want to be clear on why we're here. Because if this is going to be a showcase for the community to air some things, I don't think that's fair. We're here to solve something, let's do that. But if it's going to be raising some things that we've already responded to because there needs to be a display of something, that's not fair. Come on. So I say, can we get to what the real meat of the issues are? Because I think we owe it to the community to address those things, as opposed to picking at these things that have come up before that we've responded to already. If that's not correct, please tell me, but I'm hearing that, and I just want us to get to what's really in our way to serve. So if we can get to really what's in our way to serve, I'd love to do that.
Councilmember Ross?
This is purely the financial transparency to the council and citizens of Sammamish. It is not has nothing to do with the operations of the Y. It's purely the financial report received. When we first got the report, some amount for depreciation, a non-cash reduction of our earnings was applied, and it at the time was the amortization, the initial investment value, the leasehold improvements. And then we had a net amount that we put to reserves after deduction of non-cash. What that effectively does over the amortization life, it effectively, at time zero, we invested $27 million, plus your contribution of $5 million. We effectively are being charged back that amount again, or blocking our reserves from being funded to the amount of the non-cash from time zero. So that is a serious problem, and I think unless there's concession that that is a problem, I think it's an unresolved issue. The other part is with respect to the amount you reserve. You have the EMG report. From that, you should be able to identify the asset life. If it's a 10-year, $10 million amount, for the first 10 years, you'd reserve $1 million each year for that asset, for example. Asset B, five years, 500,000, you have 100,000 a year. So you put that in reserve, and that's how you forecast your asset maintenance and how much you fund for maintenance, capital maintenance. There's no transparency that gives us that schedule of how much you are putting aside for capital. And then finally, it's accounting for the reserves. Once you fund each bucket, there has to be a beginning balance. Any inflows, the inflows would be excess revenue over expenses from a cash basis perspective, and you'd fund the buckets and account for that, make that transparent and visible to us each annual report. Also amounts, expenditures from those inflows. So if you're gonna do a capital expenditure from what you've been reserving for that roof after year 10 for $10 million, it's not coming from our operations. We've been reserving it. It should be in our reserve summary to withdraw that amount from the reserves, reducing the ending balance of our reserves. So these are all fundamental accounting for our, we need help on that. If you can help us with that, that crosses a lot of the issues from the transparency and the financial management. There's other issues related to financial management, but I don't want to add too many issues in one. I'll come back to those when they come up, but those are the major elements that we're concerned about.
Councilmember Stewart?
Yeah, I just got a text from someone watching the meeting asking that people use their mics more. They're not able to hear everybody. So, but I did just want to add, I think, if we're kind of, are we through with sort of the background,
We're
Tom?
done with the level set. This was,
Okay.
I got 2 more points on the history.
So I think, to your point, if I understood all the questions, and Tom, you and I reviewed this, I think the first issue is how much money needs to go in bucket 1, right? Like, let's just get it out there quite simply. How much money do we think is the right amount to be in bucket 1? I think there's the EMG report, which came out, which it was a great, I mean, if I read through all the stuff, the first year and a half, you guys kind of picked a number because you didn't have any history to base it on and you hadn't done the report yet. Hold on, it's my...
But that whole issue I've got covered in the 2 slides from now about what goes into bucket 1.
Well, I have the floor, but thank you. So I think we need to pick a number to go into bucket 1. And if I read the EMG report correctly, they gave a number, but then they also said in section 1.4.3 that the best thing is to look at historical maintenance because it is not conclusive, it is not all-inclusive. And it even went on to say in the subsequent section that there would be items on there that may not be assessed a value that in fact would require some amount of money to replace. So one of the things that I would like to know, I don't know if you have it handy with you, is just now that you guys have been up and operating for a while, and as you so rightly pointed out, it's been wildly successful, even more so than anyone anticipated. What does that maintenance look like, and how does it differ from what the EMG report kind of stated? Because I think that's really where we find that balance, right? EMG kind of came in and used an industry standard and said, we think, based on a lot of things, if everything goes according to the law of averages, this is what the number will be. Now you guys have had a couple of years of operating. How does that compare? Is it more or less than what they anticipated? And let's adjust appropriately. Because I think at the end, to be fair to the community, what we want to do is make sure we have enough money in bucket one that the city's investment or the residents' investment in that facility are protected, so that no matter what happens down the road, if the YMCA starts to not be as successful and the maintenance is more than what's coming in, that there's money there, because at the end of the day, we own that property and we own that facility, and at the end of 25 years, we want that building back in the same condition that we gave it to you in, right? Pretty much. That's the goal, I think, and I think everyone shares that goal. So we got to pick a good number for bucket one, and I think that's one of the things we need to figure out tonight, and we'll let Councilmember Hornish get there in a minute. But I think that's what we need to do, and I think we should, in all fairness, set up some sort of a time frame that we would review that periodically, right? So whether that's every year or every other year when we do biannual, but some period of time where we go back and we review that, because we'll have new information in terms of the maintenance, and we'll probably need to review that for bucket two as well, because that 2 months of ongoing maintenance and operations may change, and that may be something we can just make it a rolling 2 months, or it's something we check periodically. So I think that's another point that we just need to kind of come to an agreement on, right? And then I think the other big point of contention that came up was, what are the revenues that we include and what are the expenses that we include? And again, I'm just a simple engineer. I'm not an attorney. I don't play one on TV. But I think that the easy way to look at that is you can include any income or you can include any expenses for any income that you're including. And I think that, we can look at everything that happens in that facility, right? So if it happens in that facility, and I think the big question mark may be the after-school care services that you provide off-site, should those be part of this operations agreement, or is that something separate? And I think that's another question that we need to answer. So I think those are kind of the big ones. I think there are other points in here around, it sounds like you guys submitted a maintenance plan to the city. It hasn't come before council yet, so I think that's one of those things that we need to figure out. How are we going to do that? You guys have submitted a maintenance plan. We need to approve it. To me, that would help resolve number one. Is that correct? If we did that process, would that help resolve how much money needs to go in bucket one if we had that plan approved? Not necessarily. Okay. All right. So, I think that's the beginning. I think there are more points, but I think those are the big ones that we probably just need to try to. If we can resolve those tonight and we still have the time and energy, maybe we can move to the next level. But I think those are the big ones. Am I missing anything? Are we good there? Thank you.
Councilmember Ross.
Well, you said solve bucket one tonight. I think it's only a reasonable approach and a schedule and a methodology that we can understand that computes the annual amount reserved or the annual amount required to be in that bucket. And we always fund the reserves from our operations or the revenue exceeding expense from the center. And so it's less about, it's a long stretch to solve that tonight on how you compute the bucket. But I'll ask Melanie if you can queue it up, what I emailed you. I want to show you some simple graphics from my questions that will help explain about the transparency that we're seeking. And if we have transparency, we can always adjust the magnitude of the reserving. If we may be over-reserving, we may be under-reserving. We need to be able to have a mechanism to provide that transparency. So, Melanie, if you want to drop it later, let me know when you can pop it up. I can come back to me if it's.
I have it right now.
Okay.
Is that it?
No, it's the email I sent you.
Well,
All right.
that's
Go down.
Okay, maybe it's
It's
further.
included in this document.
Okay, okay. So you're-
I'll see if I can get it for you.
mine had tables. You took away the tables, which were.
Right there.
Here it is, right
Okay,
That's it.
okay. So scroll up, I don't, okay, facts. Okay. Well, scroll to the table, I'll describe it because I have it in front of me. Okay, so this table below is a methodology for reserving assets. And so it's clearly has an assumption in this that the first is the roof, and I'm using notional data, but the roof is in this example, is a 10-year life for an $8 million replacement. So to reserve for that, you have to put aside $800,000 a year. That's what the first row is. For an HVAC system, there's 6-year life and in this notional data, and it's $3 million to replace using imaginary numbers. And that would be $500,000 a year to accumulate $3 million to replace after year 6. Well, of course, year 7, you're starting again because you're replacing it, then replace it again 6 years later. And then finally, this fire system is a 8-year assumption of $800,000 to replace. So you put aside $100,000 a year for 8 years, and then the last 2 years, you're starting a new 8-year cycle, which means in this example, you can use the EMG report to provide the detail. From this example, we're saying we need to put aside $1 million for a year. So let's say we're at year 2. That means after year 2, we have to accumulate $2.8 million to fund bucket 1. So once we have $2.8 million in bucket 1, then we start reserving 2 months of the operating expenses in bucket 2. Then finally, once we've fully funded each of those, 2.8 in bucket 1 and 2 months in bucket 2, then we have reserve available in bucket 3 for a grand total of our beginning balance. When we pay for the first asset after 6 years, that $3 million expenditure, you're going to take that out of bucket 1, so you're going to show an outflow on this table and then an ending balance. You also would have inflows from the excess of revenue over expense coming into this table. This methodology provides transparency of your asset and how much you're reserving. It also tracks your beginning balances, any inflows from the annual operations, revenue over expenses, and any outflows when you pay out for those capital expenditures or any other purpose. For example, it come out of bucket 3. Ending balance. So that's the way if we can, that from an accounting perspective, that's the type of transparency that I seek so that we can, we are maintaining what balances are available and what we have accumulated over the years. And we may say, maybe we're over-reserving or maybe we're under-reserving. It's really a mutual benefit of tracking it this way so that we have full transparency both ways.
Okay, Councilmember Valderrama. Assuming he's there. Did you get him on?
Are you there? I don't know.
Waiting to see if he's there.
Yeah, can you Are you there?
Not there.
I guess. Are you there?
Okay, okay. I apologize, I cannot see your tent card, so I can't see your name.
Yes, I can hear you now. Hang on.
We'll come back. Go ahead.
Unfortunately, because of some of the earlier.
Ramiro, can you give us just a second? Hang on.
And just wanted to first see if I could ask a question, my comments.
Okay.
Why
John, are you
seeing
okay to, okay. Sorry. Go ahead, Ramiro.
of the nature, because if I've heard, what is it that they're asking? Hello?
We're here. Can you hear us?
Okay, message from Christy saying I wasn't there, so, okay. All right, I think points I'd like to make before we go on here is, first of all, as we've heard, this is a wildly successful organization and operation. 1/3 of our city is now members of this organization.
Give us just a second.
Yep.
Hang on.
Just wanted to first see if I could ask a question.
There's a delay.
Oh, that's what it is.
Yes. Ramiro, we're going to need to call you back because we're getting a lot of feedback.
Oh,
We'll have Melanie give you a call back. Something's awry.
That was weird.
Okay. John, I'm going to let you go.
Thank you.
I can hear you great. Hang on.
So, is this on? I'm colorblind, so I'm not sure what's going on.
No, you have to move closer.
So this table is a great example, and Chris, I thank you for putting it together.
Done?
No, Ramiro. Hold on. You got to wait.
Hello?
Take it off speaker and tell him that
Go ahead.
to wait. We're having somebody else.
Romero.
The EMG report is a very standard report done for the operating systems, main mechanical systems of a building. It does not include non-mechanical parts of the building. For example, the actual lining to the pool, the foundation of the building, the walls. So we feel we have 100% responsibility for that structure over the 25 years of the lease, which EMG estimated the value, the current replacement value of the entire structure at $18 million. So this is fine for mechanical systems. In our minds, it did not address non-mechanical parts of the building that could fail and would not be covered by insurance, either the cities or the Ys. So I'm not talking about earthquake, I'm not talking about windstorm, I'm not talking about flood. I'm talking about things that could fail, and the big things that come to mind for us, if that pool cracks for some reason, we're covering that. We have 100% responsibility for it, and that is not an item in the EMG report. So I just want to point out that we're not in disagreement on everything and on how we reserve and how we get to the level of transparency that would make the council happy. We're fine doing that, but we have to understand that there's a responsibility we think we have financially that we are struggling with to a certain degree to say what's the right number we need to be prepared to fund over the life of this lease.
Cities. So I'm not about earthquake, I'm not talking about flood.
Yeah, it just takes.
Failed.
Yeah, it's not working. Councilmember Stewart?
Yeah, if I may also ask a question, so I appreciate that. I appreciate both of the explanations. I guess one of the other things that I thought or that I got the sense of in reading the agreement and from other community centers like this is that part of the desire for this reserve fund is because over time, oftentimes in facilities like this, the participation may go down and the costs go up. And the idea here is, again, to protect our investment, right, or the city's investment. And so am I correct in assuming that again, that's part of it, and that, again, if at the end of 25 years, you guys put money in there from the excess, in the early days of operations, and there's money left over, then again, we're going back to how do we reinvest that in the facility? But am I correct in understanding that? Yes. Okay, thanks.
All right, Melanie, can we go back to your microphone? Mike. Sure. Actually, I want to address a couple of questions. Marcia, your point about the report, I'm looking at the annual report. If you look up here, I have it on the page. Third line, such other information related to the facility as may be requested. In the line before that, it talks about the cost of operating and maintaining. So I think the whole financial report is something that we expected and was agreed to in the report. So it wasn't something that the Y came forth with, and had they not, I think we probably would have requested it to better understand it anyhow. So I think that, to make that point. Lori, to your point, I don't think we have resolution. We've had some conversations, but we don't have resolutions on these things yet. So that's why we're here to talk about them. And the CapEx we're going to get there, if you will. John, I got a question that if you were to lease the facility, who's responsible for replacing the pool? If it's a triple net? The triple net, the lessee does.
Well, it would be called out in the triple nets, but triple nets typically cover the roof and HVAC, those type of things. If you have a major capital improvement, that's typically the owner's responsibility.
And do you have those type of agreements?
No,
I mean,
we don't
this is the point that I kind of want to get to for history and experience and background and basis.
No, we do not.
So you've never, okay, just wanted to confirm that, okay. That's all I have. I want to go back. Did you have, anybody else have another comment? Can we go back to the present PowerPoint then, Melanie? No?
Yes.
All right, so the last two bullets, just to kind of clarify, and again, level set, the first and second report did include allocation of Seattle's WISE downtown Seattle expenses to operate the regional Seattle Y. The second report included a new line item expense of association support. So we'll get into a little bit more, but just to understand how we saw the things that changed from the first report to the second report, which raised more questions. So next slide. I don't think I have control. So yeah, what I was hoping to do then, there's 5 bullets that we can talk about to go through. The CapEx maintenance, which is the big elephant in the room, I agree. That's the biggest issue we have to deal with, is how much we set aside for that CapEx maintenance. Second is determination of the operating surplus, which is the 2 months. Bucket 2, then bucket 3 kind of fall out, if you will, if we get those first 2 things figured out. And then if we don't have an understanding, which I don't know if we're going to get to tonight or not, then we got to figure out what next steps are. But let's go next slide. So I just highlighted, this is now the CapEx. Next slide. So this is all about bucket 1. How is this intended to be funded? I kind of highlighted, Marcia, I think you and I are in agreement, and I don't know if everybody else isn't or not, but I think the intent was that it would be from the operations. But do you agree that it shouldn't be amortized then? If it's self-funding, if it was contributed by the Y, I would agree. But if it's self-funded from the operations and being paid by the members and being paid by the citizens and not by the Y, I don't understand why we would then pay something back at the end of 25 years when the lease terminates.
That's more of a John Lamb question. Defer to my CFO.
So 2 things. One, from a pure accounting standpoint, I think Chris would agree. If we spend more than $5,000, which is our capitalization policy, we have to capitalize it. And then we either have to depreciate it or amortize it for accounting purposes. Now, that is not the agreement, that's accounting. As it relates to the agreement, that's why between the first report and the second report, we removed depreciation and amortization, and then went with our estimate of the funding of the reserves based on the $18 million value. So there's no depreciation or amortization in this calculation at all anymore. We still have to keep track of it, but it's not determining the funding of bucket 1, bucket 2, bucket 3.
For the reporting to the city of Sammamish.
Correct.
Okay, fair enough. So I think one thing I would propose is we get rid of that amortization of that in the agreement. You'll still do it on your books and on the books for the center, but it won't be in the report.
Yeah, I just need to check and see if there's something there that would affect the value at termination to us that I need to be aware of. I'm not saying there is, but I would want to check that.
Okay. Yes.
This is great, and I just want to make sure who's capturing down. So like that was a great sort of follow-up item. Like I feel like we came to kind of a bit of an agreement with one, I have to go check something, and I want to make sure we get that documented so we don't lose those points. Because I'd hate for us to spend several hours here and then not have a really good, so is there somebody on point to make sure we're getting all that down? Well, she just walked out of the room, so I'm thinking.
No, this is actually being recorded. This
Okay, so
entire
we'll have
meeting's
that,
being
okay.
recorded. So we'll go back and
Okay.
hit these points.
Okay, because
Yeah.
this seemed like I felt like we had a moment there, and I want to make sure we don't lose that.
I think we actually have two. I think what I heard you say is we will delete the amortization unless there's some reason not to, that you need to still determine or confirm.
From the agreement, yeah.
From the agreement, yeah, okay. Not that you're not going to amortize it, obviously. The next two bullets, I think we've kind of answered too. If everybody agrees that the operations were to fund the CapEx maintenance as well. Not where the agreement, and maybe this will be an amendment to the agreement to make it clear that it wasn't supposed to be funded by the Y, it was supposed to be coming from the center's operations.
Correct.
Yeah, and I'm okay with that. I don't think we ever expected you guys to pay all that.
Just waiting for him to finish. Loria, excuse me.
Thank you. So I just wanted to clarify, we should capture these points. In terms of, we're talking about an amendment to an agreement that we have been operating under. And it just may be us clarifying our understanding, but let's capture these points where we feel like there's some things that we need to clarify. And then we need to take a step back and look at it holistically. I want to do that before we talk about amending an agreement that's been in place for how many years?
6,
Okay.
7.
All right.
6 or 7.
So let's just capture the points. Fair enough? Okay.
Councilmember Ross.
Yeah, on the issue of finances, section 14, I think one of our outcomes, I know it doesn't necessarily contradict what you just said, Loria, it relates to what do we expect in our financial report. I described a clear schedule of the maintenance schedule and how much we're reserving, some transparency there. I talked about reserving, having a reserve status, inflows and outflows out of the reserves so that we have a annual visibility of how much is available for each of those purposes. And so I think we should endeavor to put together those ground rules, because even 14A says as directed by the council. This is where the council's asking for that clarity under paragraph 14. So I'm going to ask us to work together to come up with some clarity of that section of what a good financial report looks like.
Melanie, did you get Ramiro on the phone or no?
Romero? Romero?
Right, sir. Have a annual visibility of how much is available for each of those purposes.
Ramiro, it's not working.
I'm sorry?
Are you there?
Ramiro, it's not working. It's not working.
Are you there?
If you have a question, maybe you can just text me the question and I can ask your question. But the audio, there's something going on with the audio.
Oh, is it still going on now?
Yep.
I think you can, yeah, ask your question
Try
right now.
You can try it while it's.
Quickly.
Oh, well, I guess the first question, I've got a series of them, but the first question that I have is fundamentally, after we've had this agreement for 6 years going forward, and it's wildly successful, a third of our citizens are members of it, is this even the right forum under the agreement as to why I believe this? I saw that we had a committee structure that had been set up. While Councilmember Hornish had says we've had conversations, it was actually him and Councilmember Ross, not the council. We're a policy body. This has always been run at the staff level. We're with them on the basis. We did have a committee one time with council members on it. And while I'm fiscally conservative, I want to make sure we address things. I don't think this is the proper forum, from my opinion, on how to address this. Because we're trying to look at an agreement that's been in operation that hasn't been questioned before, and if the issues are, shouldn't they first be coming through a joint committee up to the council for review?
Did you have other questions as well?
No, that's the first one to start off, and then when we go into the slides,
I'm happy to answer that. This agreement was agreed to by the council, and as fiduciaries, I think council has a responsibility to find out where the taxpayer money is going and watch over that. So I think this is the right forum for council to do it.
well, my question is, we set the policies, but we don't go through the procedures. I mean, this is a similar issue that we've run into others. Not all of us accountants or financial, not all of us are traffic. And so when it was established, there were committees that were set up that were supposed to pull this and then bring it to the council. Here, trying to resolve an agreement, 6 hours, that's a contractual agreement, with council members sitting or winging it. And while clients and that all send questions, I'd rather that why send us to their questions, we review that, sit with staff, and then they review it and come back to a forum. Because right now, I'm not getting my questions answered that I had put out there. And I'm not quite sure what people expect to get out of a meeting in 2.5 hours. And it seems that some council members have a predetermined outcome that's out of it. And while we want fiduciary responsibility to come out, we all done in a proper way. Frankly, I'm concerned, and I'd like some legal opinion, if the council is putting itself individually by getting involved in something of this matter without our attorney and our financial. Thank you.
Okay, Deputy Mayor Moran.
Well, regarding Councilmember Romero's, we've had this discussion before at the dais, so I hate rehashing old stuff. As far as having this discussion here, whether this is the forum, I wish it wasn't the forum. I wish that we didn't have to come quite this far. It seems like it's taken a lot of steps to get this far. I'd hate to think that what we have to go to is to have this taken to, but it seems like what needs to happen here is there does need to be attorneys and accountants involved, because the original contract clearly did not have those people involved. Sadly, it needs a review. And I don't know if this is the right place, but unfortunately, it's gotten here. So here we are.
Councilmember Ritchie.
Thank you. Given the time and given what I thought we were trying to do tonight, I think that there's been a series of questions, some background, and there's some series of questions that have been raised that I'm not necessarily personally, as a council member, comfortable with trying to land on answers today. I would hope that we can kind of understand, number one, this isn't a conversation about the incredible benefit and asset to the community that the Y is. That I don't think anyone that I've heard challenges that notion, that the Y is an incredible resource to our city, and no one, these issues are about accounting and transparency and what type of accounting procedures should be used so that we are essentially on, if not the same page, something that we can all look at with the same set of eyes or similar perspectives, recognizing that this is an operating agreement, not a joint partnership or even a partnership of equals. It's an operating agreement, and do there need to be some changes? Apparently there's some incongruity, some inconsistencies, some things that need to be called out. And my personal hope from this meeting tonight, and what I hoped for when I asked for the meeting back, seems like a long time ago now, was it about a month ago, whenever we had our last meeting, or whenever it was, early October, that the hope, for me personally, was that we would sit down, have a collegial conversation about these issues and try to essentially distill it, boil it down to a core. Here are the 2 or 3 things that we don't get as a city council based upon this operating agreement. And if we can kind of narrow those down and have it be less of a lecture or less of a history lesson and more of, here are the 2 or 3, 4, maybe more things that we don't get or that are obtuse to the council members. That, to me, would be something that we would say, here we have these things. Thank you very much for coming. Please take these with you. Let's come back. And if we don't have something coming out of that, if there isn't like some action items coming out of this meeting, then I think we haven't done our service to our community or to our organizations to try to gain a better understanding of what is supposed to go on here. So, whatever anybody else's perspective is their perspective. I just would like to state that I would hope that we can maybe stay focused here. And I'd like to add one more thing. I think it's important maybe for a minute here to maybe take 5 minutes in a minute or now to kind of maybe move into caucuses for a second so that we can kind of level set or better understand what we're trying to get out of this. Because I can see this kind of spinning for another couple hours and not really getting anything out of it. I would hope that we as a council can say, here are the 3 things we want to come out of it. The why folks, here are the 3 things we know we are hearing you say or that we want to get out of this. It should be a membership or a conversation of equals trying to have a better understanding of each other. Very different organizations, different accounting procedures, different expectations. We ought to be doing these meetings a lot more often, frankly, with the huge resource and asset that the Y presents and gives to our community and the relationship that's been built up over 6 years. I would ask that we step away from this table for a minute and kind of reorient ourselves to try to figure out what we're trying to get out of this. That's my ask. And it's 7:48, so that would be a good thing at 8 o'clock from my perspective. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Ritchie. I appreciate many of your comments. I don't know if we can break into caucuses, though, because it's a public meeting and the council can't powwow if we're not on camera. So we don't have an attorney here to have an executive session. So. Councilmember Ross?
Yeah, but going back to what Councilmember Valderrama discussed, he's shared, he's concerned about this not being addressed by staff. Well, let me refresh your memory, Councilmember Valderrama. Section 14 on annual report, the YMCA shall provide the City Council with an annual report setting forth an evaluation of all service programs provided, the cost to operate and maintain center, and such other, and this is the key, and such other information related to the facility as may be requested by the City Council. And that's what we've been trying to do over the last 18 months. That's what we're trying to do now with more transparency as requested as the balance of the council. And I think it's all centered around paragraph 14 of the contract that we need to work that transparency and put together a expectation for the YMCA so they can report. They've made some good positive steps already. The CFO, John Lamb, has already added back depreciation that doesn't impact our cash flow. That's a very positive step. The next step then is to track the reserves and utilization of those reserves. And another step that needs to be taken is how do we calculate that reserve in the first place? Let's work together and agree on it. Those are very simple steps to get ourselves aligned and a positive outcome and making paragraph 14 something we can all rely on. Then we can move on and celebrate the great accomplishments of the Y and not worry about this.
Okay. Councilmember Hornish?
Let's go back up there. No, I'm sorry. I want to address one thing that a couple people have said tonight. It's an operating agreement, not a joint venture, not a partnership. I draft joint venture agreements. I draft partnership agreements. Guess what those are all titled? Operating agreements. This is a joint venture. This is a partnership by default. We don't have a new entity, but it is a partnership. I'm sorry. An operating agreement by any other name smells like a rose is a partnership or a joint venture. My concern is, and I think is what Chris said, 8E2 of the agreement says we, the city, get to say yay or nay as to how you figure out that bucket 1. Here we are 3 years into the operation, 6 years into the agreement. We don't have that agreement. We've never approved anything along those lines. And until we do, we can't have the accounting because we're not in agreement. And I'm going to put a stake in the ground right now that I am not in agreement with the full replacement value, inflated over the 25 years, straight lined over the 25 years back of using future value. In fact, you just said a second ago, you don't have another agreement with a pool or anything. So unless you can show me a history that you're going to have to replace everything in the next 25 years, I'm not going to sign off on that. So, but if you got the history, I'm open to listening. And I think Councilmember Stewart asked earlier, if you can show that the EMG estimates, and I'm sure they're not right, but if they are far different than what you've currently spent, I'm open to listening to that too, to understand what the actual CapEx expenditures have actually been compared to what they estimated. And then we can come to agreement. But the full replacement value, I just don't see that makes, unless you have a gap or an ASC, and I forgot what ASC stands for, Accounting Standard, ASB, there is an ASC with interpretation or whatever too. I read them from time to time. But unless you have a basis and that somebody else is saying, here's how you do this, then I think that we have to default to the agreement that says we have to agree on how you're going to do it. And then we get to go back to 2016, 17, 18 to come up with the transparency to find out what's in bucket 1, 2, and 3 with the methodology that we agreed to. But until we figure out that methodology, and here we are again, 3 years into the operations, and we haven't had that. So I think that's a number one thing that we need to figure out. I guess there has been a plan submitted. Is that the EMG report?
Yep.
And what is being proposed? To use the full replacement value, not the EMG scheduled?
We're using full replacement.
Okay. And I can tell you right now, that's not going to fly with me. I'm the only one of 7. But that, unless you can show me that you have a history of that's going to be the case in 25 years, that you'll have to replace the full value. Do you have that? And you've never had experience of doing this before?
We're using microphones.
Yeah, sorry.
Please.
Okay.
Yeah, got to get everybody getting a microphone.
Sorry.
Yeah, thanks, John.
So, for the record, I ask, do you have an experience of ever having to replace over 25 years a bill of the full value of that building?
I do not. I've been at the Y for 14, 15 months, so
Okay.
I'd have to go back and look.
Okay, so the full value replacement was just something that you thought made sense, right? I mean, but is there a gap, or is there an ASC, ASB basis for that?
So the original all-in cost of the facility was $30 million,
Right.
give or take. The EMG report is now saying, other than foundation work, dirt work, the actual physical structure of the building and the improvements inside now have a replacement cost today of $18 million.
And a vault that we put in too. That was a big, the rainwater.
Yeah, I'm just saying that is where my estimate came from, and that's what I built off the funding of the reserve.
So what I'm trying to understand is if there's any basis of why you think you need to replace that in 25 years.
Because we have 100% financial responsibility for that structure over the 25 years.
But it could be half of that, it could be twice of that.
It could, but as
Or
others
it
have,
could be double that.
it could, yeah, could be.
Or twice that.
My point is, we have 100% responsibility for that structure. The information I have says that $18 million is the replacement cost today to do that.
Understood. And I'm saying I don't think that has logical financial backing to do, in my opinion only. So I just want to throw that out there. But we do get to, city gets to approve how you do that. We all agreed with that under 82, right, of the agreement. Can you pull up the agreement?
We've got a phone going off somewhere.
Hope it's not me.
It's definitely over there somewhere. There we go. Got a winner.
Again, 8E2 only deals with mechanical systems. It doesn't call out the pool, it doesn't call out the foundation, it doesn't call out the walls.
So can you point me where in the agreement it says that you would reserve that?
Where in the agreement does it say that we don't have responsibility for the structure?
I ask you first. No, but I'm saying that's where I think this agreement is falling well short of what it needs to address in many cases. I don't think you're going to have to replace it in 25 years to spend 18.7 in today's dollars, or what's that work out to be, 35 million in 25-year future dollars or something like that?
A little less.
A little less. But that's where I'm at. So 82, let's read it. The YMCA shall develop a capital replacement plan for all equipment and major systems. That doesn't cover everything?
Systems. Yeah. That's where I think our responsibility comes in.
Well, but anytime you get into an agreement, you look at the context. I would say 1 and 2 relate to each other, and it says you're going to be responsible for everything in 1. Number 2, it says you develop a plan and we agree to it. That's how I read it. Does anybody else read it different?
Okay, Gloria?
I'm going back to where I started. Remember, the bigger context of this is that we stepped in as the operator of this facility. And we agreed that we were going to maintain this facility, take responsibility for this facility, and our best judgment being an operator is that we needed to have the money in order to take care of this facility. I understand that you feel that this is too much. None of us really know for sure, but based on our experience and based on the EMG report, we know that over this period of time, given all the systems, given all the structural elements, given all the pieces to this facility, this could be a significant amount of dollars that we may have to spend in the long-term maintenance of this facility. So this is our approach that we think does the right thing by this building. So I understand that we all would love to cut corners and set aside less, but we're trying to do what we feel is the responsible thing for the building, considering all the systems and what the full replacement cost would be. I don't think that's unreasonable. That's the approach that we've taken. And then you have to ask yourself, what if it is even more? Yes, it could be less, but it could also be a lot more. So we've tried to ground this in the study that we did. We sought the external advice, and this is the input that we received, and this is how we have built this maintenance plan.
I'm not sure who had their 10 cards up. Lonnie?
Councilman Harnish, I'll take a crack at your question of whether 1 and 2 are different. The answer is yes. So 1 talks about financial responsibility for maintaining the building, and that is what it is, as has been said here tonight. If something happens to the building and the whole thing is destroyed tomorrow and it's not covered by insurance, the YMCA is responsible for the cost of replacing it. Subsection 2 is talking about something entirely different. When you talk about a capital replacement plan, that is a staged plan for things that we can foresee will need to be replaced. And if the city is going to approve anything, it would be that. But that's not the funding of the reserve. Because we can foresee the things in 2, but not in 1.
Deputy, oh, no. Marcia, I think you had your 10 card up for a while. Marcia.
Absolutely. I don't necessarily want to get off this conversation, so I don't know if, Karen, if your point was in relationship to this?
Yes.
Well, why don't you go first, and then I'll go. Mine's going back to a comment that Tom made, just to bring some clarity to it.
My question is with 2. So have we ever come across or ever have an approval of a plan for number 2? Okay, so we've never done number 2. So regardless of whether we agree on number 1, we've never even done number 2. Okay, just clarifying.
We've done The original document was turned into city staff. It was brought back to us with some edits. We got it back to EMG. They have done the edits, and I've now returned it back to city staff.
When did you get it to staff?
The document revision was completed on October 10th of this year. I believe we received it probably a week after that or so. So we had it maybe a week or so.
Okay, so when will that come to council?
Whenever council would like to see that, yeah.
You're done. Marcia, you're done, or you want to speak?
Yeah, I'll speak now. In relationship to the no joint venture comment in Article 21 under miscellaneous, 21.2, no joint venture or agency. Nothing contained in this lease, nor any of the acts of the parties hereto, shall be construed, nor is it the intent of the parties to create a joint venture or partnership between the YMCA and the city.
Councilmember Stewart?
So in the spirit of trying to work through this, so, you know, kind of how I see it is the Y is trying to be responsible and conservative because your fear is, if I understand it right, your fear is something could happen, and I think we're all worried mostly about that pool, right? Something really big could happen to that pool, and it could be a lot of money. And you want to make sure that you have the money there to repair it. And I think that, you know, in general, we want that too, right? Because again, we want to protect our investment. It sounds like, you know, part of the council is concerned that it's too much. Maybe the question we should be asking ourselves is, if the YMCA puts in a large sum of money in bucket one, and you don't have to spend it over the course of the 25 years, what happens to that money? Because if that money ends up coming back and being reinvested in the facility anyway, then maybe it's sort of a no blood, no foul kind of situation, right? And so maybe then we cannot have to worry so much. Although Councilmember Hornish isn't listening, and since he's the one that has concerns here, maybe. So what I was trying to address, okay, well, I'll just wait till we're all ready to listen. Sorry, Tom, I think it's important because I think this is something you're concerned about. So the Y wants to be conservative and make sure that they have enough money so that if something big or catastrophic happened that they're responsible for, that the money is there. And I think that's in the best interest of our citizens because it protects our investment. I think that the concern of some council members is that if we put too much money in there, then that money isn't coming back into the facility in a reinvestment. And if I understand correctly, let me ask this question. Is there anyone here who disagrees that the only place that excess funds would go would be back into the facility? Is that something we all agree on? I'm kind of looking.
I think there's an unanswered question as to what happens upon termination.
Well, that's what. Hold on. That's what I said when you weren't listening. So if you'll indulge me for a moment. So if we all agree that the only place that excess funds, like the bucket 3 funds, are going to go is back into the facility. If we all agree that that's what the agreement says, then I think that is really the only question we have to answer. Because if at the end of, at termination, whether that be 10 years or 25 years, the excess funds, if they're all going to go back into the facility anyway, then aren't we in a no blood, no foul situation if the YMCA puts a higher number than you might be comfortable with in that bucket 1, just to make sure that nothing bad happens that then can't be covered? Because we don't want, I mean, I don't want anything to happen to the facility that can't be paid for, and I certainly don't want to put undue burden on the YMCA, right, that they've taken funds out of the operations and reinvested it and built an addition or something like that, and then something happens and there's not enough money there to cover it, and now what happens? Right now we're in this sort of sticky situation, and I think it would be better to avoid that. So does that sound reasonable if we kind of jump to number 3 and answer what happens to excess funds at termination, and we all are comfortable with what happens there? Then maybe it's not that big of a deal if they want to be more fiscally conservative. Does that seem reasonable, Tom?
It does, depending on where the money is and where it's held. If there's $5 million after 5 years downtown Seattle that we could be using here in the city, I'd rather have it here.
Well, no, but my point there is it's not about where is it held, it's about, it needs to, they need to have that money so that they can, if something happens, that it can go back in. And if they don't use it, if nothing bad ever happens and there's $18 million at termination, then that money will come back to the city at that point in
And
time.
if we're holding it, we'd be more than willing to pay if something comes up.
I don't even understand what that means.
I'm trying to keep the money in Sammamish instead of going downtown Seattle.
I don't understand what that means. It's the YMCA's responsibility. It's the YMCA who has to put it in a fund somewhere.
The money is all fungible, it's all the same. If it goes downtown, it's intermixed and intermingled with their funds, where you can intermingle it with ours and still be responsible to pay for it if it comes up. And we can use it otherwise.
So you're saying that you want to amend the agreement that the city of Sammamish is responsible for the building?
No, the bucket 3.
There is no, I'm not talking about bucket 3 yet. I'm talking about bucket 1.
Oh, I thought you were, okay.
No, I'm saying that if they put the $18 million in bucket 1 and it doesn't get spent, then that becomes, then that's the question, right, is what happens to that excess money at termination? And if we come to an agreement on what happens there, then maybe it doesn't matter if it's a bigger or smaller number if we're all comfortable with what happens to that at the end. I'm kind of trying to get to a place where we can all kind of agree to something and not get caught up in.
I agree with that, to be fair. That kind of makes sense.
Right.
But not if it's such an egregious over reserve that the money is downtown Seattle, where we could use the $20 million here in the city of Sammamish.
But it's never been our money to use. I mean, you're the only place that any
We got
excess.
$200 million a year.
No. The only place that excess money could be used would be to reinvest in the facility.
It'd be
So
reserved,
if
yeah.
that money sat here, it would still just have to, like, we couldn't use it for something else.
As long as we had 20 million somewhere, we could.
But that's going in a whole different left-handed way.
Okay, Councilmember Valderrama, are you there?
No.
Do we still have him or no?
Are you there?
Okay, he's not there. Marcia?
Oh, shoot. Well, yeah. Sorry. So the reason that Tom was like not paying attention is because he was pointing out, I have to admit that I was wrong. I was looking at the recreational land lease agreement, not the operations agreement as it relates to the joint venture.
Oh, thank you, I couldn't find it.
Yes, I am. Hold on, let me put
Thank you.
Can you hear me?
No, hold on, Romero. Okay.
I'm sorry,
right.
can you hear me, Christy?
Yeah, go ahead. We'll try this.
Good. Want to confirm, hear me, right?
What was that?
Yes.
All right. Okay, so I'm with Councilmember Stewart in that there's a false premise here that in a little bit past, that first of all, that money coming back to the city under the conditions. When the agreement was made, it was originally made that the city would not have to put into this. Now, that this is being discussed on termination, it be coming out. This council asked that the Y assume all risks, including if they, and were specifically asked if there were losses, where would that money come from? And they were told the money would come from Greater Seattle. So that was what was told to us, and Marcia was there at that time when that was it, that the Greater Y would come back. So going the other direction, I don't see it as a problem because that was well understood. And right now, what I'm concerned about is we're opening up a door that could be at a time when there are major improvements about to come, opening the city to losses. I asked them to go back to look at federal land that. Second, even though they talk about this agreement being discussed for 18 months, which mind you, of the 6 years, it's only the last 18 months. And when they say we discussed, it's only 2 council members. It's not even the city. It's not the other council members. Third, this discussion continues to keep going to legal documents. And again, we don't have our lawyer here. We should be having these discussions to try to sort out. and send from the council what is our policies so the staff and operational be addressing. But the real concern that I have here is that it seems that we're trying to go towards saying, well, what happens at termination? How do we get our money? And I think we should be more concerned about what happens when the losses start coming in and our citizens start picking up 500 to 700,000 a year, which is the typical loss that Federal Way has instead. And that was the original basis for this agreement. The Y, being conservative, has been trying to meet what the councils have repeatedly asked for in that. I don't know where this direction is of being concerned about the termination, since the agreement specifically calls out and says there is no expected surplus to come out. The money will be continually put into the reserves into it. So it behooves us, one, to keep in mind that we do not want the losses, and when you start trying to go that direction, you open yourselves up for that. Two, we don't have our lawyers. Three, we're getting into a lot of minutia that committees should be looking at. And four, we have not been in discussions for 18 months, and there's only 2 council members have been. We're trying to figure it out. I'm for being fiscally conservative and maintaining and sustaining this pool, but let's be honest and make sure that we do it in a transparent fashion for everybody, because 1/3 of our citizens are members of this pool. We're happy with it, and so let's continue to proceed in a way that's prudent, fiscally responsible, but it's not going to be solved today or in 2 other meetings. So let's lay out what are the real issues, and then let's try to address them on how we move forward jointly. And as was pointed out, this is not a joint venture or a partnership. This was an agreement where they stepped up and helped us out on this. And in the total life cycle of the cost of the pool, if I'm not mistaken, it was like 7 to 10%. Marcia can probably correct me on that. Thank you.
Councilman Ritchie.
I'd like to ask for a 5-minute bio break, please.
I'm game for that. Okay, let's take a quick break here. Okay.
Yep. Here.
All right. Councilman Hornish.
So I'd like to address 3 comments that were made earlier. Laura, you made a comment that based on your experience, but we've heard tonight that there is no experience over 25 years as to what actually needs to be replaced. Whereas the third-party estimator, EMG, said over 25 years, it should be $5 million in future value, dollars, of the equipment. That doesn't include the pool, I understand, but there's no history of the pool to be failing that we know of. Number 2, 8E1 and 2 was purported to be different, but I want to read it closely. The Y shall be responsible for maintaining the following elements. Doesn't say the center, it says the following elements. And if you go down after the colon, roof, exterior cladding, structural elements, heating, venting, and air conditioning, HVAC, plumbing, electrical, exterior pavement and sidewalks, fire alarm, fire suppression, backflow. That is everything listed on the EMG report that needs to be replaced. That's why I say it really is the capital replacement plan for 8E2, that those 2 things dovetail together, that is for the following elements, not the center, the following elements. So those 2, in my mind, are explicitly intertwined and is saying the exact same thing. Third, Romero said there wasn't supposed to be any money left over. But if you look at paragraph 7I, can you go to 7I, Melanie? One more, right there, oops. The operations of the center is anticipated to be self-supporting. That doesn't sound like there's a risk on the Y to have to come up with money. It's supposed to be self-supporting. It says no operating subsidy by the city, but it should maintain itself. And I generally agree. If we get the buckets right, the money's there to operate it, and I don't care where it goes or whatever, but we got to get the accounting right and know where the money is and keep the money where it should be for the people who are paying it. So those are my 3 points. To move it along, if you want to move back to where I tried to lay out the 8, we haven't even gotten through the whole 8E2 issue on the PowerPoint, but I will defer
John.
before we get back to that.
I said we don't have 25 years of experience here. We have 25 years experience at other facilities. We have a pool in Auburn right now that's 10 years old and failing. So just, I want to be specific that we don't have experience here.
I'd be open to seeing that. And how often does that happen, and how much experience and historical experience you have? Open to understanding that better.
Marcia?
We also have experience with a failing pool at our downtown facility, and that I don't have the numbers in my back pocket, but I know that was a long battle to try to figure out how to get that repaired, and the cost was immense. So to John's point, we do have experience, sadly, with failed pools.
Councilor Stewart?
Yeah, so again, in the spirit of trying to move this along, maybe the action item could be that you guys could share those experiences and those dollar amounts. And then also, I think, in addition to that, the Councilmember Hornish, one of the things that the EMG report did not include any structural elements. And so it would be interesting to know, other than the pool, what other structural elements might there be that the Y is responsible for, again, to make sure that that's covered. And it's not that I want to see more money there, it's that I want to see the appropriate amount of money there, right? I think that it is, it would be irresponsible of us to, put excess money in there and just have it sitting there, but I think it would be equally irresponsible of us to not have enough money there and to put either organization in a situation where there aren't funds there, we've gone and spent them on something else, and now we need to repair something. So I think, would that be something agreeable, that we could do that? So we'll get an additional sort of understanding of what those structural elements are, and then values on those replacements. Because it's my understanding too, not just YMCA, but any kind of community centers in general, it's the pools that worry about. It's my understanding that many cities are shutting down their pools because they can't afford to repair them. So I think that's what we want to protect against.
Just a quick clarifying point, because the two of you are head nodding, but is the YMCA on board with what was just stated as well?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Councilmember Ross.
Yeah, to extend what Councilmember Stewart just said about the structural elements, part of the city's obligation is the general liability insurance. And I would like us to explore what is covered on the general liability insurance so that we don't include elements that are not otherwise insured in the city's responsibility. And therefore, that's why I think that we are somewhere between an overstatement of the reserve for the entire facility collapsing because it's insured by the city, to some of those elements that were just discussed, such as the pool. If the pool's not covered by our insurance, then that's certainly a structural element we could consider in putting together in our reserve schedules.
Councilmember Hornish?
I concur. I mean, I think we may have a meeting in the minds if we have the backup. I mean, what I would want to see is that for buildings 1, 2, and 3, you've had to, over 25 years, you've had to fully replace everything in that building. That's what I would have to see to say I'm going to sign off on that capital replacement reserve.
Councilmember Ross, did you have more, or still a 10 card up? Okay. Oh. Dave?
I think that the thing that is not stated in Councilmember Hornish's thought is the unknown and unexpected.
Okay, you want to get back into this a little bit? And to address that, I think that's what insurance is for, frankly. Necessary funds, was this done? No, we found out that we've never had a city-approved budget for 3 years of reports, and we're going to have another report here in about 2 months, or another year. So it'd be nice to get this pinned down sooner rather than later. Disregard the first bullet on the bucket 1. Where the funds are held, we all agree that they're intermingled with the Seattle Wise funds, correct? There's no earmark, no escrow? No escrow. Okay. That's one of the concerns. And right now, I think you have about $3 million reserved in bucket one. And have you spent anything? You haven't. Why not? Because it just has come out of operations in general, or? Sorry, yeah.
Because we haven't agreed on what's supposed to be in there yet.
Fair enough, okay. So we have, okay, we'll get to that in a second. And we talked about termination, and there is a potential that it could be negative too, to be fair. So we understand and acknowledge that. So next slide. So moving on to the 5 points. This was the first point, the CapEx maintenance. The determination of the operating surplus. The last 3 points are a lot quicker, to be fair. Next slide. So before we even get to bucket one, we've got to figure out what are the revenues and minus expenses. And that's the operating surplus of this center. So when we had earlier discussions, we talked about what revenue to include, and I think we talked, and we all agreed, and we should all agree now, that it's just the revenue generated by that building, not your off-site schools or operations or anything. Totally agree with that. As long as the expenses matches only those revenues, which I think is the reports you gave. The one question that came up since that discussion, though, what happens to the revenue? Do you get revenue from the CWU facilities that you're renting out or managing?
We run our youth sports programs there. And those have been, that had been included.
Had been, okay.
It had been included.
Well, and then as long as you're including the expense of the head of the employees for that as
correct.
well. And that, okay, I mean, I don't care. That makes perfect sense. So I think we're all in agreement with that, if you will. The expenses get a little more complicated. And we just answered that first question, CWU personnel. The interest. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Let's go to the first bullet under the interest. The Y is currently taking out of the operations the interest on a portion, if not all, of the $5 million capital contribution. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And if it's in my mind, just to be clear, and I'll state my position, a capital contribution in this type of an operating agreement never earns interest from the operations of the center. If the partner in the agreement had to borrow the money, that's their cost of capital, and it doesn't come out of operations. So I would propose that that is not an expense of the center's accounting. Same thing, similar with the furniture, fixtures, and equipment that is owned by the Y. Remember when we went through the level set of the agreement, I think there was $500,000 that the Y was to buy, and the Y owns today, and the Y insures. So if that equipment tips over, the Y gets paid. Not the center, but the Y. So I don't think the interest, and you are charging interest on the equipment financing, I believe, too, correct?
Only for the portion that is financed.
Fair enough. But I don't think it should be earned at all, because that was another capital contribution in my mind.
Tom, can we pause just because
Sure.
I see 10 cards up here at Marcia?
Yeah, just, you know, I feel like it's important to do a little bit of, just a smidge of history on the capital contribution. We get all of our capital funding through philanthropy from individuals or companies that give us the money, and we have to go out and solicit those funds. The city wanted to move much faster than the Y wanted to move. For us to raise the $5 million, we need time. The city did not want to take the time. We asked for an opportunity to wait on the project so that we can complete our capital fundraising, and it was, no, we need to go. And so at the time, Jesse and I, who was the previous parks director, we talked through that. It is not in writing anywhere, but just so you know that in order for us to hit go, because it made sense to get the project kicked off, it's, you know, time, wait another year, it's gonna cost you more money, all that kind of stuff. But in fairness, that the reason that we have used the operations of the facility to fund that capital side is because we had to hit go much faster than we were even capable of raising funds.
Councilmember Ross?
Referring both to equipment and the capital contribution, they're both time zero investments, and they must be fully provided by the Y. I appreciate moving faster, but sometimes when you're in an opportunity, which this is a great opportunity partnering with the city of Sammamish, sometimes your borrowing costs increases, but you do that in exchange for the opportunity. There's nothing in writing that says that the city should be paying for any interest finance charges to raise that capital, so I fundamentally, absolutely do not accept being charged back for interest on those items.
There's nothing that says it shouldn't.
Absolutely, there's not. You owed $5 million at time zero by taking interest to pay for your debt to raise the full funds. You effectively are paying less than $5 million contribution. Your contribution is $5 million times zero, and to be charging the center for your finance charge, that's your business with the Seattle Y or whatever bank you work with to get it financed, but to pay us anything less than the full $5 million and the full capital equipment contribution is, I'm not fulfilling the obligation as far as I'm concerned.
You know, I feel like sometimes we start to split hairs. There are a number of things that have gone wrong with this facility, and I'm going to point out the HVAC system. That the city was responsible to deliver to the YMCA a fully functional facility at the time of opening. The HVAC system has not worked since day one, and the city did not fulfill their responsibility to give a fully complete building. That facility has never been commissioned. There are still punch list items that have never been taken care of that we have funded out of our operations to support the nature of this facility being operational for the members. And it's splitting hairs, but there's this sense of we're partners in this. How do we work together to figure out what makes sense? And so, you know, from a perspective of, gosh, the city does this, or you should have this. The operating agreement was put together in a way that we were partners. And if there are things that we need to fix, let's just please focus on that. Let's just please focus on that.
Councilmember Stewart?
Okay, I'm going to try again. So in the spirit of kind of coming together on this, Councilmember Hornish, when you and I met to talk about this last weekend or the weekend before, I think we kind of agreed that for some of these items, let's understand the materiality of the number so that we aren't splitting hairs. So I think, Marcia, you raise a really great point that I don't believe we should split hairs. And Councilmember Ross, I really appreciate you coming into this with your accounting, but I think we also have to keep in mind that this is a not-for-profit and this is not a for-profit venture. So I think your theory of, you know, that there's an opportunity cost and that's on the YMCA, that would assume that the YMCA entered into this opportunity and they were going to profit from it. But in fact, this isn't a for-profit venture. So I think that's where we have to, you know, kind of look at this in a balance. And, you know, I want to make sure that we protect the investment of our citizens, but one could also look at the fact that, you know, the YMCA was willing to put up $5 million, and they don't really get anything in return in terms of they don't have any ownership rights on this at the end of the day, right? And like you're a not-for-profit, so you're not making money on it. So I guess my question is, where do we think the citizens have lost? The citizens of Sammamish have lost out on anything if this interest is taken out of operations? I guess that's where my question comes from is, you know, again, as a council member, it's our job to look out for the citizens, and I think we should do that, but I'm not seeing where the citizens are losing because the YMCA financed money to contribute essentially a gift, if you will, of $5 million to the city to build this facility that they're not going to get any money back from. Am I correct in my interpretation of that? So I want to protect people, but I don't want to be, I don't know, it seems petty.
Councilmember Hornish?
Yeah, I'll go backwards. We put in $30 million. We don't expect to get any money back. We did it for the good of the community, if you will.
But we still own, we have an investment.
Councilmember Stewart. Councilmember Hornish has the floor.
I want to clarify as well, not-for-profits doesn't mean they don't make a profit. It means they don't return it to shareholders when they do Materiality, I think we're on the same page and I agree. However, if you have 20 immaterial items, they add up and become real money at some point. So we've got to make sure we understand them, but we can, once we understand them, then we can say, yeah, we don't care about that from a materiality point of view. I still think it should be accounted for correctly, though. To Marcia's point, you've got people contributing, and you owe a fiduciary duty to them. We've got taxpayers. The money came from the taxpayers. We owe a fiduciary duty to them. That's why we're here, to talk through this, to understand. We can't just say, well, we gave the money to build it, and we don't care what happens to it now. We have to, as a fiduciary, be responsible. So that's why we're talking. I think there's a pony in here somewhere where we can kind of work most of this out, if not all. But you got to understand our viewpoint too. We've got responsibility to taxpayers. It's the first time I've heard that we still have punch lists. I'm a little concerned about that. 3 years into the operations, or 4 almost, right? We have a communication issue, I think, with the staff here, Mr. City Manager, to know that if this is true, I'm very perplexed and concerned that we have that issue.
Deputy Mayor Moran.
There just seems to be a lot of open-ended things that I don't think we're going to get to a conclusion to tonight. So rather than beat on this, I think that we were making much more headway before the break. I would like to, I know I can't make a motion or anything like that, heaven forbid, but I would like to suggest that we can't gather a committee, so we could call them a collection of people. I don't know what to call them. That perhaps could work with the new deputy city manager, who is probably really good at this, because you've got, I know you've got a really great couple of facilities that you had on Mercer Island, and maybe sit down with some of the folks from the YMCA, and you guys, work some of these out and find out what is going on with this punch list, and try to get some of these things communicated back and forth, and perhaps bring us an update in 2-3 weeks or something. But it just seems like we were doing much better than all of us sitting here and going back and forth over all of this when we don't need to be. But that's just my opinion.
Dave?
Just to quickly give credit to city staff, the walkthrough that that SEVDA and our facilities manager does on a monthly basis addresses anything that's still outstanding in the building, and we keep an ongoing list that that SEVDA documents on a monthly basis that I know that she has in her files and that I've talked about in our annual report in years past, to be able to show that we're making progress in all those pieces.
Councilmember Stewart?
Yeah, I just want to address I understand that a not-for-profit doesn't mean that they don't make a profit, they just don't return it to shareholders. But in this particular agreement, none of the excess revenues go to the YMCA. They're all going to come back to the facility. So again, that's where I feel like, let's strike the appropriate balance. Like, I want to be responsible, but I want to strike that right balance. So if there are excess revenues, they're going to go into one of 3 buckets. If any of that's left over at the end of the day, it's all coming back, right? I think that's where we're heading with this. And so if that's the case, then it's not exactly that they're going to make a profit, because any profit, right, which would be the revenues in excess of expenses, are going to come back to the facility as described in the agreement. Am I misunderstanding that?
No, as long as you get the expenses right and the money's not flowing out before it even gets to the bucket 1, 2, and 3.
Okay, so maybe that's where the collection of people need to identify. And again, I think we came to an agreement in principle on the expenses. And I think Councilmember Hornish, to get to that.
I would not agree with that.
But I thought we had an agreement in principle that you can use any expenses that are incurred against revenues that are included at the facility, correct?
Let's talk about them.
I thought we already covered that in the revenue included. We already passed through that.
Expenses. We talked about CW.
Yeah, but revenue was first.
Revenue is fair, but we haven't talked about what expenses get included.
Okay, so we're good on the revenue. We're just working through the expenses. Okay, fair enough.
Let's do that.
All right. So The other thing of interest, which is, maybe it shouldn't be an interest, it should be under allocation on the two bullets below, but there is a long-term debt on the Seattle Y that is being allocated to this center, and I would question how this center is getting any benefit from the Seattle Y borrowing that money, and why that should be an interest expense.
It's how we treat all of our branches. They get their allocated portion of interest expense.
First, a question, John. Are all of your other facilities that get an allocation, are they separate reporting entities under your financial statements, or are they pro forma like Sammamish?
Sammamish is not pro forma. We have separate operating statements for all of our facilities.
Including Sammamish?
Including Sammamish.
So would I see a reserve account on their books?
It's the reserve is kept at the AO, so
What's AO?
the association office.
So why is that?
That's where we keep all of our reserves.
But you said we had statements, separate statements for Sammamish facility. If you do, you show your assets, your liabilities, your revenue and expense.
Right, we have those assets, liabilities, revenues, and expense. All of our liabilities, though, that we consider reserves, long-term reserves, are kept at the AO, whether it's Sammamish or other facilities.
Does it have an account, separate account called Sammamish?
No, it's under general reserves.
So how do we know how much has been reserved for Sammamish? There's the transparency problem we've been talking about all night. Okay. Allocated cost to long-term debt. Time zero, we paid cash. Why are we even getting allocated debt against our P&L?
So I'm hearing,
Again, Councilman Hornish, didn't we, I thought, when we sat down and talked about this, and this jumping ahead a little bit, but there's kind of an overhead expense, right, that says that probably all of the people sitting at this table are a cost that gets shared across all of your facilities, right? Because there's some amount of time, AKA tonight, right, that you put in terms of management. Is that what the long-term debt is also part of? And I guess the question is, how, again, is there a materiality issue? How much is that long-term debt allocation to Sammamish? And I don't know the answer, so I'm not saying it is or is not material. I'm legitimately just asking the question. So I think that, Tom, when we talked before, I think that was kind of one of the things we talked about is, you know, how are these overhead costs allocated, and do they make sense in terms of that allocation?
I think that's the question we're asking.
Yep.
But I really question why debt is even in the allocated expense. We're getting no value from that as the operations of the center. Now, I will agree, jumping down for a second, we kind of covered employee payroll costs anyhow, only for the building. The allocation of the other overhead costs, which does include the long-term debt, I think, interest. I agree that you don't have a separate payroll here for the center. So there should be an allocated expense for what you're doing to pay the employees. I think, and I was a little confused between this and the association expense that got added in the second report, but I think it's generally the same idea of some allocation of expenses. But I think when the $300,000 that you did for initial startup, it said for marketing. So it sounds like we have our own marketing here at the center, but yet we're being allocated an expense from the Seattle's marketing. And that doesn't make sense.
Dave?
So when you look at the, if you look at the, association support, you're looking at it in two different ways. One is people, and one is infrastructure. And so we don't carry, we don't have our own membership operating system. We don't have our own Microsoft suite contract. All of those infrastructure pieces are done at our association level. And then, in addition to that, we also don't carry our own payroll staff, our accounting staff, our risk management staff, our marketing staff, yes, our attorneys. So none of those lines of our service actually occur at our branch. We have, staff that are delivering the programs, but the development of those programs and the infrastructure behind an actual business operation are at our association office.
Alonda?
Also, I'll add that, it's important, you've mentioned, Tom, I think you've talked about the center being separate, and we don't necessarily operate or look at it that way. We look at, the value that we bring to the community, the Y brand and the value that that brand brings to a community, but also within the Seattle area, we function as one Y, and so that means the marketing, all of the functions that Dave mentioned, but I'll specifically say on the marketing side, there may have been expenses in the beginning, but everything that we do, whether it's membership, support, or it has to do with advertising or acquiring new members all the time, that's done at a Y level, and the Sammamish Y benefits from that. Everything that the team does is really done at a Y, sort of at a 1Y level across the whole association, and it isn't a charge for time or anything like that. It's sort of done and consumed as needed. So that is a overhead expense that everyone benefits from. All of the branches benefit from.
Councilmember Ross, is your tent card still up? Or okay, Councilmember Stewart?
Yeah, Tom, one of the other things we talked about when we met was if I join the Sammamish Y, I'm a member of the Y, so I can go to other Ys, right? And so that was one of the things that you weren't aware of at the time. So there is that cross benefit that I think our members get. They're not just, it is not a separate community center that if I join the Sammamish Y, I can only go to the Sammamish Y. There is that benefit, which I think, Tom, you said that in knowing that, that made you feel better about the allocated costs because there is that benefit to our members, right? When I travel, I get to go to whatever Y I want to. Yep.
And I was just going to add, it is not just the Ys under the YMCA of Greater Seattle. It is the YMCA nationally that members in Sammamish benefit from as part of membership. So, the benefits are far beyond the benefits conferred by this structure, this physical structure. So let's keep that in mind.
Councilmember Hornish.
Okay, so I had a little more detail when I went through this initially, that the overhead costs, not the association, to be fair, I think in the footnotes said IT, HR, marketing, communications, accounting, and payroll. That all sounds reasonable, frankly, if the marketing is not separate here. The association support includes facility maintenance support services. Can somebody explain what that is?
We have a roving group of 4 maintenance staff that come and help our branch maintenance staff on larger projects. And so think of replacing filters in the HVACs. That's not something that can be done with one person. We need to have, so there's a roving group of people that then circulate throughout all of our different branches to be able to make sure that that work gets done appropriately and to the timing that those preventative maintenance items need to happen. The HVAC is just one example. Let's say that a motor fails on a boiler. You'd need to go in with a group of people to be able to take that apart and replace it. So those guys are dispatched according to where the facility or the maintenance is needed for them to be able to help take care of it with our team here at the branch.
And that's not capitalized if it's over $5,000?
Microphones, please.
If it's over 5,000, it would be.
It would be. And it'd be a direct expense, not an allocated expense of the association.
We allocate the staff of the maintenance pro rata.
Okay, okay, I see what you're saying. Okay, gotcha, okay. IT support services, I'll skip that one. Program quality assessment, I think you made that point. Compliance membership. It said it included insurance. What insurance is included in association? Is that insurance for the Seattle Y that we're being allocated an expense on?
No, it would be the insurance for the Sammamish branch, so it's portion of general liability
So
property.
we're responsible to have insurance as well. Can we get ours paid for? I don't think the operating agreement says you get to allocate association support either. Can you show me where it does? Well, this is where we need to pin down, and I don't think we should be carrying a lot of the stuff that we're getting no benefit from, but that's my personal view.
Dave, did you have something?
I guess my question is the benefit of the association support that we have is the ability for the building to be able to function. If we don't have the support of Alonda and her team, we don't have a membership campaign to be able to allow other folks to be able to be aware of the building. We don't have the ability to be able to talk to folks about being able to find a rate that works for them, which is what we do with every single person that comes into the building. Without IT services, we don't have internet to be able to communicate with everybody in the city. So I think that we have benefit from each one of those areas that are not staff or infrastructure that we would have actually at our branch.
Councilmember Ritchie.
Thank you. I have to leave. I have an early flight tomorrow. I apologize. Thank you very much for coming and providing the information that you have, and I look forward to working with you guys for another however many years we're able to keep this going. But thank you very much for the information, and look forward to more. Thanks.
Thanks. Gloria, did you have something? Oh, okay. Councilmember Stewart?
Yeah, hey, Tom, one of the things, again, when we met and talked about this, we were going to ask city staff how much the marginal cost of the insurance is for that building, because, again, we agreed that there may be a materiality issue that, again, not worth splitting hairs over, and I don't know if we asked that question in advance of staff, but I think, to understand for each of these, I think it's important to work things out, but again, we may spend more money and time figuring it out than the actual expense is as we go through this. So maybe that's something another action item we can take is to understand, right, the city has to have insurance on like every property. And so really and truly, what is that marginal cost? It may be so low that it's not worth trying to figure out the accounting time to move money around. And Tom, do you recall that we had that conversation on the insurance?
We did, but it also applies to how costly is it that they're subtracting from the operations. Not just how immaterial it is to us for our incremental cost, but how much is their incremental cost that they're using the operations for. The operations funds to pay it.
Well, but again, it's an association cost, right? That they just kind of peanut butter those costs so that they don't spend time figuring out, was it 15 minutes or 5 hours that crew came out and helped us repair something. It's just covered so that whatever has to happen, it just happens and nobody's worried about it. And on some level, I think that's nice, because if you have a big repair job and it ends up taking 4 days, we're not worried about how much that's going to cost us. We just know that you guys are going to come out and take care of it, right? So again, I appreciate being fiscally prudent, but I feel like we're getting way in the weeds here that maybe isn't productive.
Alonda?
You want to go? And it's just one small but important detail. So the facility isn't called Sammamish ABC. It's called Sammamish YMCA. And so with that YMCA, there is something that comes along with that, and that is things like we are nationally known for our swim program. So people have a certain amount of trust and expertise that they sort of attribute to any YMCA facility. In this area, we have incredible brand reputation and recognition, much higher than any other fitness facility in the area. There's a lot of goodwill that comes along with the Y. So while we're celebrating the fact that it has been wildly successful, I think it's not immaterial to note that there is value. I mean, you mentioned earlier that there's no value and no benefit that you're getting, and I just wanted to just say that there absolutely is value associated with the Y brand, and I would say that this facility and the people that trust in the facility and trust their children to our children and know that when you invest in the Y, the Y does great things in the community. I believe that has incredible value, and I would say that this facility has accrued a lot of benefit from that. So it's hard to put it into a specific number, but I would just push back on that piece about the benefit of the association and say that there is incredible benefit in the Y brand.
Councilmember Hornish? Oh, sorry, Marcia, I think you were up next. Sorry.
Thank you. So I think that I have a couple thoughts. One is, I think to Karen's point, we're ping-ponging all over the place, and we're not really able to hone in. Okay, if this is the issue, let's talk about that issue, and let's what do we agree on? Where do we have the disagreements? And then what happens next? Is that go to this group of caring people that want to fix this and figure out what the process looks like moving forward. So there's that part of it that's in my head. And then secondly, that when this agreement was put together, and again, we're kind of splitting hairs on this association support, because in some ways it feels like, gosh, we're picking apart this a little bit, and does this go under an expense? Does this go under, should this really be something that the Y has a different, totally different accounting practice for when it doesn't fit exactly in this nice little bucket? So I'm kind of struggling with that. But also from a perspective of that when this agreement was put together, that we came to this because the city of Sammamish received from your feasibility study that this facility was going to deficit on a yearly basis $400,000 or more. And so with the WISE brand, the WISE experience, the WISE model of operating an amazing nonprofit, that we don't incur the kind of deficits that oftentimes happen when cities operate facilities, because you have a different model. And it's not saying one model is wrong or one model is right, but we have a different model. And that model is what makes this brand work. It's what makes it work. And so, if you were doing this on your own, you're going to be spending $400,000 a year because you're not going to be able to replicate the way that we do our work. So there's got to be a little bit of give and take in here for understanding that it's going to cost us a little bit differently to do this work than you're seeing it. But this is a model that has been proven, and we are delivering. And so it takes me back to, let's talk about the issue and the challenge and break it down, because the ping-ponging it's not helping us.
Generally agree, which is why I tried to set out this, and I think this tries to set out. Fair enough. It tries to set out what I think are the issues. Just to be fair, the allocated expense is $1.2 million in 2018. The association allocated support is $500,000, so it's 1.7. The whole profitability after you subtract all that was 1.5. So you're talking about, if we had none of that allocations, we would double the profitability of the YMCA operations. So it's not immaterial. Now, some of it needs to be there. I totally agree. How much, and refresh my memory, both of those allocations are on a revenue pro rata. So if we're hugely successful, we're taking more of the expenses, whereas it takes just as much time to operate the Sammamish Y as it does some other Y. So would you be open to saying, let's just allocate all the expenses to all the Ys on if we've got 6 of them, 1/6 of that expenses gets expensed to each of the 6. Is that a possibility? instead of doing it on revenue? Because I feel like if we're hugely successful, we're getting penalized by having it allocated on revenue.
Marcia?
So I will flip the question. What happens when the Y isn't as financially successful? Would we still be having this conversation, or would you be saying, well, you took the risk, it's your problem to deal with? Because you can't have it both ways. Because when a facility starts operationally, you know, it's on a high. It's on a high, and it goes up for probably 5 to 6, 7 years. And then you start and then your expenses start to climb, and then your membership starts to dip. And we can show that to you in every single facility that we have. We can show you the statistics on that. You know, we have our Coal Creek branch, which was, it opened 10 years ago, and our membership has had its ups, its downs, but I'll tell you, we're spending a heck of a lot more money on that facility right now, and it's not equalizing. And so there's going to be a time when this facility and when this membership is on the decline. And you know what? Who's going to be there to take care of it? Who's going to be there to make sure that everything is paid for? It's excuse me. It's going to be the YMCA. As I choke, I'm sorry.
Tom, you want to keep going through this?
Let's move on. I think we've covered this one. I'm not sure we have any agreements, just to be fair, because I mean, I'm stating my position. I'm not sure how the other council members feel. But let's go on to the next slide, Melanie. And I think we can get moving here pretty quick, actually. So now we're moving on to bucket 2. Next slide. And once we figured out what expenses are supposed to be included, including some allocations, if not on a revenue basis or whatever, then this bucket 2 is easy, times 2 on a monthly basis, right? So I don't think there's any discussion here, except for what happens to the funds in this reserve account at termination. And I think that should be addressed for all buckets, to be fair. So on the next slide, the calculation of bucket 3, next slide. Similar, once you get bucket 1, once you get the operation expenses figured out and the revenue, you get the operation surplus, you get bucket 1 figured out, you get bucket 2, bucket 3 is left over. That's easy. So this is, I don't think there is a major issue except for where they're held. Right now they're intermingled with the Seattle's Wise cash. I would say that if they're going to come back at some point to the center, we should be holding that cash here in reserve. So when and if we both agree that we're going to reinvest in the center, and that way we can use that cash for our other operations until when and if we take that liability and say we're going to put it over there. So it's a cash flow issue.
But if we wanted to use that money,
You are right now because it's intermingled. That's my point. And it's supposed to be coming back here.
yeah, but if we know what that amount is. Anything
Neither
right
I didn't
there.
either. Sorry. But I don't think that would be a hard thing to do if once we get the buckets 1 and 2 and the revenue and expenses figured out, and depending on that bucket 1, I think that's the big elephant. Yep. There's going to be a lot more money in bucket 3 is my point, I think. What happens to the funds upon termination? I've asked that ad nauseum on the other ones. So I think that needs to be addressed if we want to get into an amendment of the agreement to address what happens in these situations. So the finance team of the city can understand, do we have these funds available or not? And I'm going to actually raise an issue. The agreement says those funds will go back into the center. If there's $15 million in bucket 3, or let's just use bucket 1. Say we agree to the $1.4 million a year reserve. At the termination, there's $15 million sitting there. Where does that $15 million go? I would posit it comes back to the city because it was based on and earned from our investment of $25 million in the center. Now, if you want to get to a pro rata distribution or something, we could probably talk about that. But that needs to be addressed because if this agreement terminates, it's not clear what happens to those funds in bucket 1, 2, and 3.
Marcia?
I'm gonna
Okay. Gloria?
give my tab to my boss.
Okay.
So I think the other question that should be considered with that question is what happens if there's a negative balance in bucket 1? I mean, we can't just talk about just the upside. I think we are looking at big dollars in moments of big success. But if we're going to talk about rebalancing and worrying about how we, spend all the money we have, what about the risk? You have to talk about both at the same time. That's what makes this work. If you're going to celebrate the upside, then you have to hold the downside. The Y took on, as part of this arrangement, whatever it is, we're holding it. That's what we agreed to when we entered this agreement. So let's ask both questions. If we ask one, we got to ask both. We got to talk about both.
I think that's fair. I've got Councilmember Valderrama who wants to make a comment, though. He's going to try anyway.
Are you there?
I am here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Yeah, I fully support what Marcia said. When it was made that the city would not take loss. Federal Way was 750,000 lost, 500,000 lost. My question, if we're going to try to look at this, let's also look at risk. Currently, as I understand it, well publicized that the Y has a lot of major costs coming up, retirement, pool, HVAC, and other major expenses. How much is that looking at the city if we were one permit today? Not saying that we are, has some weird connotations here. How much would the city today be on the hook for?
I think that's what we were just talking about. Councilmember Hornish.
I agree. I think it should be addressed if it's negative. And I think we should be on the hook. I think it was totally unfair to ask the Y to be on the hook for this on the total downside. That's just pure business in my mind.
Okay. So next steps, are we done with this?
Yeah, let's go to the next steps, and then I'm not sure if we have any next step, next slide. Next slide. So if we have agreement on the above, I'm not sure we have any terms agreed upon. We have a lot of ideas. If we can get to that position, then we can amend the agreement. The other thing that I see in these type of agreements, when one party in a joint venture partnership, whatever you want to call it, is in control of the books, the other party has an ability to audit the report. It's not an audit per se. It's not a financial audit. But you get to actually look at the general ledger of the partner that's keeping the books to better understand if the report that you're getting is valid. And you usually bring in a third party to do that, and you pay for them. And if the difference is, if the corrections and restatements from that third party is more than 5%, then you bear the cost of not doing it right, so to speak. But it's a very standard. Would that be something that the Y would be open to?
It's okay. You go.
Based on what? Is that just a request, or are you suggesting that there's an obligation that we're not keeping?
No, I'm basing on it. If we amend it, could we add a audit by the city of the report? And if it's more than 5% different by that third party, when they come back and give us a report, then you pay for that cost of the audit. It's not an audit, but it's a checking to make sure that the report is done, and it's based on the agreement. Yeah, exactly. Yep.
I would say that we need to take a step back and ask ourselves, what are we really trying to accomplish with this arrangement for the city and for the community? Because based upon the things that I've heard in this discussion, I mean, in terms of materiality, I ask myself, is this just another way to point to these little things that's going to keep us focused on little things as opposed to the big things in the community? I'm not sure. Based upon what I'm hearing today, I'd be a little bit nervous because I'm not clear on what we're really after here, what we'd accomplish with it. So that's not something that I would sit here and at this point be willing to agree to after this conversation.
Councilmember Hornish.
I think the whole intent is for us to have transparency and responsibility and a fiduciary duty to our taxpayers.
There are ways to have transparency, and there are ways to serve together without what we have gone through this evening. There are ways for us to do that.
All we did was went through the agreement and what the agreement says. Let's move on. If we do,
We did a lot more than that. We did a lot more than that. So we can move on now.
I
So
would
let's go.
contend all we've done is go through the agreement and show it doesn't
I
address
know,
a
it
lot of
doesn't
these
feel
questions.
that way. It doesn't feel that way.
I'm sorry, it doesn't feel
It-
that
it
way, but it
doesn't
doesn't
feel
feel
that
that way
way.
to us in the reports we're getting either. We
Well-
ask questions.
Well,
On the second report we got, after we asked about the depreciation, it was changed. We're going to add that back and take EMG's full value. Oh, and now we're going to add association support that wasn't allocated on the first report. So all these movements
so
on the
we've been
reports-
addressing your concerns when you've raised them. We've done that
No,
for
you're
you.
not. We have no
So you're saying,
agreements.
have we or have we not?
We have
You just
no
said we did.
understanding. Yeah, and that's my point about what an audit would do, is it would say, if they went in on a third-party basis, not us, we now are paying somebody to go in and ask those questions.
My point. We've tried to address every question through the months that you've asked, make changes in the reports that you've asked for. Every time we've done that, you move the ball on us. And there's
How
more-
so? Give me an example.
I can't.
Everything we talked about were the three issues we talked about, John. Bucket 1, 2, and 3, and what expenses get included?
It was bucket
1, 2, and 3 to begin with, and then it became, what's in that overhead? And can I see the actual person being paid at the Sammamish branch? I mean, that's the example of moving the ball.
Your microphone is off. Thank you.
That's the example of moving the ball. We've tried it with our.
But it got changed from report 1 to report 2, who was included on the heads, right?
We took out the non-facility people.
I know, but that's why we're asking
as
questions.
was discussed with you.
But we
Again.
don't have an agreement yet, is my point.
Yes, we have tried to respond to all of your questions. It keeps moving on us.
I don't see how it's moving.
You're not on the receiving end. We are.
Okay, I feel we have a deterioration in the meeting this evening, and I'm not sure we're going to make
Well,
a whole lot
I
of.
think it goes to the second point. If we have no agreement, which I don't think we do, then
I just want to make sure we're moving forward on this rather than taking 2 steps back and a single step forward and 2 steps back. So I feel like our meeting has gone longer than anticipated. We're almost an hour over our allotted time period. It's almost 9:30. I think we said 8:30. I'm wondering if getting back to the deputy mayor's suggestion of, let's just call it what it is, a committee is more appropriate. But I understand that you two have been on that committee and have gone through that, and that's part of the reason that we're here this evening. But I'm trying to find a path forward which doesn't lead to a further deterioration in this meeting. Deputy Mayor Moran.
I never said committee.
I know. I said committee.
Just to be clear.
Period. 30.
We got it. Keep going.
Getting back to the deputy mayor's suggestion.
Okay, so I'm again going to suggest, because I agree with the mayor, I think this is, we're just way off of topic. We had a few things that we were going to address, and we're way off of where they were. So I'm going to suggest that we gather some people and we include some key people that need to be in that discussion and then have a report come back. If that does not work, then we need to consider the next move. But I do think that we had some good moves going on here until we went to break. So I would like to go backwards a little bit and kind of move, and see if we can't grasp where we were and move forward a little bit in a smaller group rather than having to do it here and in this sort of setting, I guess. That would be my recommendation.
Gloria?
So the Y is absolutely willing to have constructive conversation on the key points that were identified and brought to us before. We're glad to have representatives at the table to discuss those points.
Councilmember Hornish?
I think it's a good step to try, but I will tell you, I have reservations because I've been involved with this for 18 months, and we've not gotten agreements on either side. So I feel like we're spinning our wheels, but I'm willing to give it another try.
I've got Councilmember Valderrama that's got something to say as well. Maybe. You guys have them still or no?
It's a good question.
I don't know if we do.
Maybe. Please hold.
Oh, yeah. Are you there?
I'm here.
Go ahead.
Your wheels, but no, I want to ask a question when I can.
Please do.
Yeah.
Okay. First of all, I agree with the comments that have been said. Yet another dysfunctional meeting. I don't think we're on track with what we were supposed to do. We had asked questions that the council members should have had answered onto it. We don't have an agreement on committees. Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Just keep going.
Yeah, so we don't have an agreement on committees. This has just been a dysfunctional meeting, another one on our long list. What we need to do, what we all need to be doing right now is start looking at how can we address these issues effectively without trying to renegotiate or force conditions on the Y that they haven't agreed to before. If we're going to have some sort of election of council members, I would ask that they be different council members because they keep using the word we and the rest of the council hasn't been involved with this. So if there's going to be a collection, it should be a different set of collection of council members working with them in good faith to try to be fiscally responsible, but also recognize the success that the Y has brought to our city. Thank you.
Councilmember Stewart.
So I was just going to ask the question of what collection of people do we want to have? And if we are going to include council members, I would like to be included. I feel like I dove in fairly well, not as deep as council members Hornish or Ross, but I dove pretty deep in this. So if there is a collection, I would like to be included if that's possible.
I would be amenable to adding Councilmember Stewart to it, but I do not think Councilmember Hornish and Ross should be peeled off because they have been at this for a year and a half, and losing that continuity, I think, would be a mistake.
I would like to
vote, but we can
Yes.
we can kind of have so I guess my other question, sorry, before I yield, would be who else do we think needs to be part of the collection of people?
I was mentioning that because I had, just at break, I had just a few words with our new deputy mayor.
Deputy city manager.
City manager. You're the
Deputy city
deputy mayor.
manager. So I just thought maybe I'd throw him under the bus.
But I think who on staff should be up to our city
Hold
manager,
on.
right?
Deputy mayor's got the floor.
He just had some great things to say, and,
But I
city
think
manager, if
city
you wanna
manager
sit in
should
when you're
decide.
able, but
I'll work with Chip if that's the consensus.
Microphone. Microphone.
okay.
So are we okay as council of going forward? Councilmember Hornish, I understand your frustration relative to the collection of people continuing on and feeling like we're spinning our wheels continually. I want to put some bookends on that because I do not want it to go in perpetuity, especially spilling over into a new council in January of 2020 when you'll be off the council and with it your knowledge, and then we have to put a new collection of people together to contend with this. So I think if there can be some agreement on a when there'll be a sit down, and if we can agree on that this evening as maybe a final point, then we can move forward and adjourn our meeting here. Is that fair? Well, if everybody's sitting here and has a calendar in front of them, we do it up at the dais, so I think we should hopefully be able to do it here. Is everybody amenable to finding a date? It's easier to do while we're sitting here in person than it will be over email or making phone calls.
It would also be helpful for the council when we meet with the collection of people to be really clear on the will of the council in terms of the issues that we are addressing.
So unfortunately, we can't vote on what those are in
Well,
a study session, so
Have to have
we
that
can.
understanding is my request so that we'll know.
So, yep, Mr. City Manager, if you would please add that to our agenda for the November 4th meeting so that we can address that. Okay. And then I think the meeting needs to be, well, I don't think it would be until after the 4th anyway. No.
So what exactly do you want me to say on the agenda?
The city council needs to, we need to have a discussion and give the exact points to the collection of people to discuss.
Okay, what exactly we want, and I think we can take it off of some of this stuff. I think so. But the council can state that in written form. Okay.
Mr. City Manager, you need a microphone.
Oh, sorry. There we go. Come on, Rick. I know.
Councilmember Hornish.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I think I got that. So that basically the list of, what'd you say again? I'm sorry. The list of, we can say
issues.
deliverables, issues, right, to address.
Issues to come to consensus on.
Okay.
Councilmember Hornish.
Or not.
Or not, and then we
go
would,
to the next.
yes,
next
then we
step.
would go to the next step.
Lori, your point, I mean, I think, and I appreciate your comment, but there has been a majority of our council that said, let's dig into this to figure out what the report is actually telling us. So that's why we're here. If we didn't have a majority right now to be here, we wouldn't be here. So the majority of the council as a body definitely wants to drill down on this to understand it.
That's clear to me. However, based upon what I understood we were to discuss this evening, it feels that we've gone well beyond the pale of what I was expecting. So it would help us to prepare and so that we can have a productive conversation if we have a clear understanding of what are the issues, and to have some type of a materiality standard around it so that we're really focused on the big things that really matter for this arrangement. That would be my ask so that we can make real progress.
Okay, do we have a date? Since folks are checking calendars, sometime after November 4th.
I would need to, yeah, I was gonna say, is it evening or daytime? It can, I mean, it doesn't have to be a public meeting, right? It's a collection of people, so it can be during the day.
Could be during the day. Whenever the collection of people can coordinate their calendars, that's when it can be.
I could meet on the 8th during the day.
Okay, we have a date set up. Dave?
I think I heard that the council meeting was on the 4th.
Yeah.
The 8th, I would say to get our group to respond to specific questions that the council has agreed upon. I think 4 days later would be a
Too
challenge.
quick. Okay, fair enough.
Well, looks good.
13th? Do I hear the 13th?
We have a council meeting on the 12th.
Yeah. 13th works for me.
Who meets though the second Wednesday? Oh, they meet during the day.
I can do that. '15th, going once? Anyone? Bueller?
November?
Okay.
What was that?
Somebody bring him soup.
Later in the afternoon, be better?
Medication will have worn off by then.
Did I hear you say, Tom, after 10? What time are you available, Chris?
They were going to discuss it on this day? It was the 12th, but it sounds like it's the 4th. No, that can't be on the 4th. What do you want to try? That calendar
Noon?
is too heavy.
Just a staff point of clarification.
Oh,
What council meeting are we scheduled to bring back the topics for consensus for
November
the
4th.
council? Pardon?
November 4th is when.
The 4th.
That meeting is jam-packed.
Oh, okay, sorry, I thought that's what Andrew was asking.
So the question being, my understanding is that staff is to accumulate kind of the pieces of this conversation tonight, bring it forward to council to create a consensus as to what is going to be asked of the Y or the discussion topics. If that is November 4th, we have some concern about turnaround for packet and what is on the agenda for the 4th. It's very heavy.
All the 4th is going to put a simple, Melanie and I work on a simple agenda request. All it's going to, thank you, Mayor. All we'll do on the 4th is do a simple agenda request to find out what are the specific issues that the council wants the Y to address. That's all that's going to be.
Okay.
Once that happens, then this group of people, right, group of
collection
of people will get together and work out that situation. If it can be worked out, then we can gather the information, bring that back to council, and figure out what amendments need to be made to the contract. If it can't be worked out, then we can go down to that last point, as Councilor Hornish had suggested, and we can go do something different like mediation or something if we can't come to an agreement. So the 4th will be just initial, so we can get specifics for the Y. And then once we have a meeting or two, then we'll bring that back. But we want to get it done prior to the end of this calendar year so that we can get some resolution to this.
Okay.
Is that about
Thank you.
right, everybody? Okay.
So are we targeting the 15th still? Is that?
Thank you.
That's my understanding.
Did we get? No, John can't do the 15th. Okay.
So might I suggest that I don't think the list, in all fairness, and I appreciate, you guys being able to take a deep dive and do this, but I don't think you're going to find us stray far off of this PowerPoint presentation. So does that help you in your staff preparing?
Yeah, I was under the impression that tonight, what we had received, the about 20-page document, was going to be more specific. There was a lot of repeating. There was a lot of copied over, pasting over. I'm not sure that was not specific questions. So I would be concerned that seeing what we had received the last time, that if we receive that again, it will be harder to distill.
Got it.
Than if not.
Why don't I recommend this, is that we get the collection of people together first, maybe just the council collection, put together a succinct list so it's ready to review at the council meeting, and the full council can adjust, modify, or affirm. And then we'll shoot, because I think it's points well taken, Dave. When you batch a lot of the 7 people together, we're repeating each other because we didn't look at what the other wrote. So I think if we can do that and cleanse it up and make it very succinct as a committee, I think that'd be helpful.
So that means we have to meet this week, just so you know, Chris. Okay.
Okay, well, I'll leave that up to the three
So
of you
if we do that, so we meet this week, we have a list to take feedback on and finalize on the 4th. I still don't know that, to Dave's point, does that mean you would be able to be ready by the 8th? And is that a date that even works for people?
Well, can I jump in here? Because, Christy, I think when you said it, it won't stray far from And I appreciate Dave's comment. When I read that 20-page document, I go, oh my God, where are we going with this? My PowerPoint tried to distill that down and answer most, not all, most of the questions that were asked by all the council members. And I think if we address these issues, we will address all of those questions in that 20-page document. Most of them, not all. Some of them were kind of, why are we here? Which is not as to the operating agreement.
I think that's what Gloria asked for, though, is that we, at a council meeting, we get this list of questions and we have a majority vote on that. So it may or may not be this list. It will probably be some portion of this list, and it may have additions or subtractions. So I still think, to Dave's point, they need some amount of time to digest whatever we actually vote on and come up with. Because while we have, as a council, have voted to dive into this, we as a council have never actually voted on specifically where we are with each one of these points.
The only thing I would say, and I understand that and I agree, but I think if you understand the issues we talked about tonight, we won't add any issues, I guarantee that.
I don't know. I've seen our council.
But I think 4 days, based on what we talked about tonight, might be sufficient, but, you know, it's up to you guys.
Oh, sorry, Gloria. I thought he was pointing. No, nothing, okay. Dave?
Just from a personal standpoint and respecting and loving my colleagues, if we did get those questions on November 4th, I would tell you that having my awesome crew get together starting on that Tuesday morning to be ready for Friday would be difficult.
So are we, the 18th is Monday, right? I hate the, but John's critical. Is if we do our pre-work and we get really succinct in what we provide before the 18th, if we can all meet as the big committee, big group on the 18th, would that work?
Yes.
And
Work for me.
will that work?
What time? It's going to be very dependent.
Do you have a specific time you need?
Well, I guess also where would be, so I could do like 3, after 3, or after 2:30 on the 18th.
I would prefer to do it earlier.
I appreciate that, but
I need to check something here.
So we decided the 12th was, you had a conflict, right, Tom?
Yeah,
on the 12th?
yep.
And the 13th, did we try the 13th?
that looks good for me. That's wide open.
That's a Wednesday?
Wednesday.
That doesn't work for me.
Okay. And the 14th was bad for somebody.
That was John.
Thursday. John's out on the 16th.
15th.
15th, I meant.
Oh.
The 14th was bad.
Yeah.
So that pushes us to the 18th.
4 o'clock, 3 o'clock?
Mayor Malchow, can I interrupt for just a second?
Yes.
Councilmember
Valderrama.
Valderrama has dropped off the phone,
Oh,
but he
yes.
did text me.
Yeah, he's texting
Did
me
he?
right now.
Okay, yeah,
He's
he's-
saying council needs to pass a resolution allowing, he's not calling it a collection of people, but
Yes.
he says, since we formally voted against it, and that's something
probably
we can do
true.
on the 4th too. That's easy.
Yeah. What's the earliest you can do on the 18th?
I have a 1 to 2 that's pretty immovable. And I have an 11 to 12, so that's why it makes it, or 10:30 to 12, so. I could do before 10:30, if that works for people,
That would work really well for me.
or after 2:30.
Okay, we got several head nods.
I love mornings. I
Yeah.
love them.
8 o'clock?
So,
I
I
don't know.
don't really, but for
I don't know. I don't have my work calendar.
I could do anytime.
Okay, so it sounds like Councilmember Ross needs to cross-check a calendar, but it's sounding like that works for everyone.
What's the,
The 8,
What'd
it
you
has
guys-
to end before 10:30.
Can we start at 8?
8? 8 a.m. AM.
I'll do 8 p.m. though.
And we have to finish by 10, okay?
By 10 o'clock, 8 to
Yep.
10.
8 to 10.
Monday, November 18th, 8 to 10.
And we'll get you,
And are we here or downtown for the Y, folks?
We can come here.
Right.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, Jim.
We'll set up a room, we'll have a room for you guys, everything will be set up.
Probably should be coffee.
and we'll get you the issues list before, after the.
Hopefully on the 5th, they'll have that.
Okay, good. Are we squared away?
On the 4th, we're going to do some specific issues, specific questions, specific issues for the Y. Once those are approved by council, those are the questions that will be taken to this meeting on the 18th to start the process.
Well, and sent to them before the meeting.
Yes, they'll get it the next meeting.
Yes, yep.
We're good with that, right? Okay.
Okay, I think we're adjourned then. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.